Hello and welcome to Literary Masterpiece Theatre. I'm your host, Woolworth McBillions III Esq. Today, I'm going to be reading to you one of the undisputed classic novels of all time. It's a master in the genre of horror. It deals with themes of love, loss, and redemption. I'm of course referring to Ghost Dad, based on the classic 1990 film starring Bill Cosby. It's Novelization, written by Mel Sebulash. Sebulash? I'm not 100% sure. There's a great scholarly debate constantly being waged about the pronunciation. It's based on a screenplay by Chris Reese and Brent Maddock and S.S. Wilson. One of the ands is written out, another one is an ampersand. That's confusing. Story by Brent Maddock and S.S. Wilson. So, without further ado, let's dig into this brilliant novel. I can hardly contain my enthusiasm for this masterpiece. That is why the show is called Literary Masterpiece Showcase. But it's just so passionate that if I trip up on my words, that's why. So yes, let's get started. Ghost Dad. Chapter 1. Danny says that I'm a haunt, Amanda Hopper said. Is that true? Diane Hopper smiled affectionately at her pretty baby sister. Oh no, Amanda, she told the 5-year-old. But I really can do the laundry without any help. What you should do is go up and get ready for bed. Dad hasn't finished reading the Canterville Ghost to you, has he? Amanda nodded. Under her eyes sparkled with enthusiasm. Diane understood Amanda's appreciation of the ghost story. When she was Amanda's age, she had enjoyed listening to her father read the funny tale. In mind's eye, she recalled her mother listening and laughing with her. Amanda was never going to have that experience, Diane thought sadly. What's the matter? Amanda asked. Nothing, Diane replied, feeling slightly embarrassed. I was just thinking about how much better Dad can read the story now. Really? Practice, Diane explained with a smile. After reading it to me, then to Danny, now to you, Dad almost knows the story by heart. Now go on, I'll see you there before you go to sleep. Amanda scooted up the stairs, and Diane grinned at the thought of her little sister's time with Dad. He had some weird ways of doing things, but she loved him. The sound of the phone interrupted her thoughts. It was Jonelle Davis, her best friend. I wanted to be the first to wish you a happy birthday, she said. Tomorrow. Jonelle laughed. I know, but if I waited, I wouldn't be the first. What are you doing? The laundry. Oh, sorry. I also called to see if you can guess who I saw at the mall this afternoon. A guy? Yeah, but a really super special guy. He was asking about you. Tell me, Diane said anxiously. Tony Ricker. Tony Ricker, Diane repeated, not willing to believe in her ears. What did he say about me? He wanted to know if you were in the mall, and he seemed disappointed when I told him you were at home. He said he hoped he bumped into you sometime. That would be a great birthday present. How did he look? Gorgeous, Jonelle reported. I know what you mean, Diane replied. But I have to get off this phone now and throw another load in the dryer. I'll see you in school. Bye. As Diane pulled clothes from the washing machine, she amused herself with thoughts of telling her friends that she was going with Tony Ricker. Some would be jealous, but her true friends would be happy for her. While Diane was considering which friends would act like true friends, Amanda was listening intently to her father's presentation of the ghost story. Some time after the family had retired, Elliot Hopper read, they were awakened by a curious noise in the corridor. It sounded like the clank of metal, and seemed to be coming nearer every moment. Amanda smiled. Her daddy's scary tone didn't frighten her. Father got up at once, he continued, put on his slippers and opened the door. Right in front of him he saw the ghost, an old man with eyes red as burning coals, long grey hair coils. His garments were oily and ragged, and from his wrist hung heavy manacles and rusty chains. My dear sir, said father, I really must insist on your oiling of these chains, and have brought you for that purpose a small bottle of Tammany Rising Sun lubricator. Amanda giggled, and almost as though the giggle were expected, there was a momentary pause in Elliot Hopper's performance. Then he read on. It is said to be completely effective upon one application, and there are several testimonials to the effect on the wrapper. With these words, father laid the bottle down on a marble table and, closing his door, returned to bed. Picturing the father in the story insulting the ghost, Amanda giggled again. Daddy was funny. Like the father in the story. He would act the same way if he came face to face with a ghost. Amanda was sure of that. She could see the scene as she listened to more of the story. Then her father's tone changed. Okay, honey bun, he remarked. That's enough for tonight. Sorry I had to work late again this weekend, but remember, it's just until Thursday. Now make me louder and hold me up to the door. As usual, Amanda was sorry her special time with Daddy was over. She quickly reached for the tape player on the nightstand and turned up its volume control. Then she faced the player towards the hallway. A second or so later, her daddy's voice called out, Good night, Diane! By then, Diane was down the hall in Danny's room, dropping off his share with the laundry. She heard her father's recorded message, but she wasn't in the mood for it, especially because she knew he probably wasn't through with her. Don't wait up for me, his voice commanded. I never do, Diane said, shaking her head at the idea of replying to a tape recording. I thought you were too grown up to answer, Danny said, laughing at his sister. Very funny, Diane said. And how do you plan to repay Mr. 12-year-old? Very sinister. Their father's taped voice interrupted. Good night, Danny! After hitting the play button on his cassette player and holding it up, Danny smiled at his older sister. Good night, Dad. Danny's voice boomed from the player. I'll see you in the morning. Good talking to you. Danny stopped the player and smiled broadly at Diane. In return, Diane shook her head in mock disgust. In the meantime, Amanda reached for the tape player and lowered the volume. Okay, Amanda, her daddy voice said. Now turn out the light and go to sleep. I love you. I love you too, Daddy, Amanda said, reaching for the tape player and switching it off. A moment later, Diane entered the room. I have to put away your laundry, she said. I'll tuck you in and shut the light in a minute. Amanda was sleeping contentedly by the time Diane tucked her in and gently kissed her. I love you, Diane whispered, and turned out the light. When Diane finally got ready for bed, she was exhausted. She was glad Sunday was over. Her day of rest was Monday, in school. It had been a little over 2 years since her mother had died. Diane had pitched in, helping her father keep things going around the house. But lately most of the work had fallen on Diane's shoulders because her father was working hard for a promotion at his job. On Thursday he was supposed to learn if he had made it. Diane couldn't wait. Diane glanced out her window and saw several lights on Joan Bankhead's house. Joan had moved next door about 6 months earlier. She was a writer and worked from home, except when she had to leave the house for research. In her 30s, attractive and single. The lights made Diane wonder if Joan was working. It was late, but according to Joan, she worked when the creative urge hit her. Diane closed her drapes and climbed into bed. She hoped Joan was working, not sitting around waiting for Elliot Hopper to stop there before going home. Diane knew she wasn't being fair. Her father had been seeing Joan for a few months, and Diane actually liked her, but she couldn't get used to the idea of her father having a romantic interest in Joan. Or any other woman. Chapter 2. Elliot Hopper came home late that night and quietly headed for his bedroom. A flickering light coming from Danny's room caught his attention, and he stuck his head in the room, thinking that his son had fallen asleep while watching TV. Hi, Dad, Danny said, looking away from the video game he was playing. What are you doing? Dad, Danny answered, seeming puzzled. You've seen this game before. We played it together, don't you remember? Of course I remember the game, but what are you doing up? You have school tomorrow. You should be sleeping. Then he turned on a lamp and switched off his video game. I wanted to ask you a question about school, he said. Danny, his father replied indignantly, you can't tell me you were playing that game just to pass the time until you had a chance to see me. Smiling and trying to hide it, Danny said, well, I do like the game, but I wanted to talk to you about this Trunk of Doom magic kit. He picked up an open magazine and pointed at an ad in the page. We'll talk about it in the morning, Danny, his father replied, closing the magazine and reaching for the lamp next to his son's bed. Now go to sleep. Okay, Dad, Danny said reluctantly. I love you. Me too, Elliot Hopper said. I'll see you in the morning. When the alarm buzzed next morning, Elliot wished he could roll over and sleep for a few more hours, but he knew he had to be at work on time. He also had to get Diane and the others up and moving. They liked to sleep, especially on Monday mornings. As soon as the sleepyheads were awake, Elliot showered. He was shaving when Danny stepped into the bathroom doorway and said, I need to talk to you. Go ahead. I told you I would be happy to hear about the video game in the morning. No, Dad, Danny said, trying to hide his disappointment. It's the Trunk of Doom magic kit. We need to discuss. I showed you it last night in the ad in the magazine. Just then, Diane stepped up and tried to push past Danny. Can I get in there, please? She said. Stay calm, Danny said, before turning back to his dad. I need the kit for Wednesday or I can't do the trick. And I need to speak with you, Elliot, Diane said as she handed her makeup kit to Danny and started brushing her hair. Take a number and get back in line, Danny remarked, covering the makeup kit with his towel as if he intended to do a trick. I'm sorry, his father said. I completely forgot about your magic kit, Danny, but I'll pick one up for you on the way home. Pick one up for me? You have to order it. It has to be shipped. It comes from India or Chicago. I'm not sure about that. It may be Jersey City, but you have to order it. The bathroom is all yours, Elliot announced, quickly stepping past Danny and Diane. Don't fight over it. And I'll make it up to you about the kid after Thursday, I promise. Wait a minute, Danny called. You chase him and give me a minute here. Please, Diane said. Danny pulled away his towel. Diane's makeup kit was gone. It had disappeared. Oh no, she roared. Where is it? I'll tell you later. Danny! Diane screamed and charged after him. She was twisting her brother's arm when her father reappeared. Let go of Danny's arm, he said. You give your sister her makeup kit. The next trick you can do is to get dressed in 2 seconds. And you should also get moving, Diane. Your sister and brother need breakfast. I'll see you downstairs. They always need breakfast, Diane said sarcastically as she snatched her makeup kit from her brother's outstretched hand, guided by the fact that his father had just turned and walked off. Danny decided it wasn't a good time to pursue the matter of the magic kit. Moreover, he didn't want to miss breakfast. As usual, Amanda was the first family member seated in the kitchen for breakfast. How do you always get down here so fast? Danny teasingly asked upon entering the room. How do you shave so fast? I don't shave, Amanda replied, a puzzled look on her face. That was a joke, Danny explained. How about getting down here so fast? Amanda asked. How did you two get down here so fast? Diane asked. I forgot to shave, Danny joked. Did you shave? Amanda asked. He is joking, Diane said. Your brother Danny is always joking. In fact, he is a joke. I want some pancakes and waffles, Amanda replied, and happy birthday, Diane. Smiling slightly and nodding her head, Diane quickly started to prepare her little sister's breakfast. Oh yeah, Danny added, happy birthday from me too. I wanted to get you something good, except you're the only one who always knows what's good for a present for someone in this house. I decided my present for you would be the honor of not having to go out and shop for a present for me to give you. How do you like that for a present? I love it. I must say that you're a very unusual child, Daniel. You're exactly like your father. Thank you for noticing. Yeah, and I can imagine the kind of excuse he'll have about my birthday. Hey, Danny protested. Let's stop teasing each other. I'm sure Dad wouldn't forget your birthday. He said he was going to see you downstairs. You heard him. That doesn't mean a thing. Listen, Diane. I'm sure he wouldn't forget your birthday. Elliot Hopper was about to bounce down the stairs and join his children in the kitchen when Danny's confident words hit his ears. He had forgotten. Completely. Probably already forgot, Diane said, and I'll have some story about making it up to me after Thursday. You know what I mean. He thinks the whole world is going to be different after Thursday. Elliot was frozen with panic. he wanted to run and hide. How could he have forgotten Diane's birthday? Actually, he knew how he had forgotten. He had been putting all his time and energy into a possible promotion at work. If it came through, things were certainly going to be different around the house. Good, Elliot told himself, but you have to get moving now. He turned and looked around. There had been something he could do to pretend he hadn't forgotten. The pleasant aroma of cereal cooking caught his attention. Time was running out. Only 2 chapters in, it's already an emotional roller coaster ride. I can hardly contain my feelings. Ugh. Chapter 3. Sometimes Diane cooked whatever her sister and brother wanted for breakfast. This wasn't one of those mornings. She didn't feel happy about her birthday, and she definitely didn't feel happy about playing mother around the house. It was no fun at all. Here, she said, sliding a bowl of cereal and a glass of juice in front of Amanda, your pancakes and waffles. They look wonderful, Danny said. I'll have 2 eggs, hash browns, and a few strips of bacon, and... Without a word, Diane slapped a bowl of cereal and a glass of juice on the table in front of Danny. Or, he continued, if the hash browns are too much trouble, I'll settle for some cereal and juice. Danny's luck with breakfast was much better than his father's luck with a birthday present for Diane. He had been forced to settle on a makeshift birthday cake. In truth, it was nothing more than a mountain of shaving cream on top of a flat-topped hat. It looked it. Burning candles stuck in the shaving cream didn't help. Smiling as best he could, Elliot stared down the stairs and sang, Happy birthday to you! Happy birthday to you! Happy birthday, dear! While Elliot carefully pretended to have forgotten Diane's name, he also continued his very slow-paced trip down the stairs. His lead foot seemed to be in line with an object several steps below, which would considerably hasten his trip. Amanda's roller skates. Diane laughingly provided the letter sound to assist her father. Doris! He said, pausing to think, and then added, Donna! Dolores! Diane provided the first syllable of her father's continued in slow-motion descent. That sound well at all. Dinosaur! Elliot sang. Diverticulitis! Matey. At that very moment, Elliot's song made Diane, Danny, and Amanda laugh out loud. Simultaneously, his lead foot settled on Amanda's roller skate, but almost as if his luck had turned for the better, he stopped. Reaching down and picking up the skate, he said, Honey, don't leave your skates on the stairs. Sorry, Amanda said. Okay, Elliot said, picking up speed and moving into the kitchen. Happy birthday, dear Diane. Happy birthday. You. So emotional. As soon as Elliot could set down the cake, and the skate, he hugged Diane long and hard. Feeling happy, though slightly embarrassed, she said, Elliot, you don't have to get all mushy with me. Hey, he responded, fathers are supposed to do crazy things some of the time. For my 9th birthday, my dad dressed up in a bunny suit. I wouldn't call that crazy, Danny chimed in. He wore it for a week. A whole week, Danny said. Well, Elliot explained, he only meant to wear it for the day, but the zipper got stuck. Sounds as if he was a grandpop, Danny remarked. Diane laughed in agreement as she did. Her father leaned over and kissed her on the cheek. I have to run, he said. Diane's cheerful expression disappeared. What? She roared, turning into a tiger. You tell me you have to run? It's my 17th birthday, and you have to run? When Janelle turned 17, she got a convertible. I got shaving cream. Well, you didn't fool me, Dad. You completely forgot my birthday, but you just can't admit it. I guess it wasn't important enough for you to remember, was it? And that's all news to me. Elliot paused, trying hard to think of a reply. Finally, he mumbled, Oh, yeah? Is that so? Yeah. Well, that's where you're wrong, Elliot said weakly before turning to Amanda and Danny for support. Your know-it-all big sister really fell for that one, didn't she? Did you notice how I set her up for it? Amanda and Danny stared at him in disbelief. The shaving cream cake hadn't inspired their confidence. All right, Forget I asked. Elliot shrugged and turned his attention back to Diane. It just so happens I did not forget your birthday. I couldn't forget your 17th birthday. In fact, not only did I not forget your birthday, but I got you something so incredibly wonderful that even you would have to call it outstanding. Doubtful, Diane replied. Elliot reached into his pocket and pulled out some car keys. Do these look doubtful? He said as he dangled the keys in front of Diane. What about them? Thursday goes the way I expect it to go. I think the company will be getting me a new car, and guess who's going to be the owner of the present car? The one in the driveway. Grumpy? An unfair nickname, but yes, you guessed it. Diane loved the idea, but she didn't want to appear too anxious, especially because she still has doubts about the offer. What's the catch? She asked. No catch. It's yours. Excellent, Diane replied, reaching for the keys. I'll drive it today. I only have one class this morning, and wait. Yours on Thursday. Oh, please, Diane begged. I'll drive you to work. I'll do the shopping. I'll even pick you up after work. I'll be careful. I'll stay buckled up, even when I'm parking. No, Diane! I said Thursday. Diane stopped reaching for the keys. She felt heartbroken and her face showed it. She didn't want to wait until Thursday. She wanted to show her friends what she had gotten from her father for her birthday. On her birthday. Turned and started to walk away. Don't give me that sheepdog look, Elliot called after her. It won't work. Diane didn't answer. Her heart filled with hope. She recognized something in his tone of voice. Elliot was weakening, fast. Continued towards the front door. Hold it, he called as Diane reached for the door handle. I'm not giving you any look, he said, turning his way. I'm just hurt. Can't you understand that? Let's call it a truce for now, okay? Diane bit her lip to keep from smiling. She knew the look of surrender when she saw it. A truce, she said. That's fine with me. Now. Chapter 4. Elliot glanced at Amanda and Danny. They looked disappointed. What's the matter? He asked. Nothing, Danny said. Is that right, Amanda? Yes, Daddy, but Diane should have a happy birthday. Amanda's sad expression was more than Elliot could handle. Here, he said, handing the keys to Diane, but if you don't drive right on the way to my office, you'll be taking a cab to school. Go on out there. I have to put out the garbage. I'll help you, Daddy, Amanda said cheerfully. You just help your sister, Elliot said, smiling at her, so I guess you should help me now. Danny, you clear the table. Though Diane had been expecting to get keys, she wasn't prepared for the thrill of victory. Father and Amanda went off to the garbage can. She stepped over Danny and showed him the keys. You believe he gave them to me? She asked. Would you like me to make them disappear? No, Diane replied, quickly moving away from him. Would you walk Amanda to the daycare center today? Sure, Danny said. Consider it a birthday present. Thanks, Diane called just before stepping outside. You know, my birthday, my father got me 27 Ferraris and 34 Cadillacs. It was marvelous. I crashed them all into the same lake in a matter of minutes. It was brilliant. Stepping quickly and triumphantly, Diane headed for the car. You won't regret this, pal, she called to Elliot. Busy carrying the garbage can and still smarting away from the agony of defeat, he could only generate a weak smile. Once he had deposited the can in the collection area, he turned to his little assistant and said, "Thank you, Amanda, and have fun." A moment later, Stuart Williams skidded to a stop within inches of Elliot. Stuart and Danny were classmates. They were also friends some of the time. This, Elliot decided, would be one of those times. Could it be a visit from Stuart to boast about what appeared to be a big, shiny new bike overloaded with added accessories? "Hi, Mr. Hopper," Stuart said as Elliot walked to the car. "Hi, Stuart. You don't have to take out your own garbage, do you?" Stuart commented in horror. "We pay people to do that for us. Anyway, I wanted to show Danny my new bike." "How surprising," Elliot said mockingly. "You mean to say that you have a new possession and actually want to show it off? That's unusual for you." "Yeah," Stuart agreed, "but you don't get this kind of bike without connections. It's a lot faster than Danny's. It costs at least twice as much, so really it should be faster." "Really?" Elliot replied. "I thought I saw one like this for sale at Kmart last week." Maybe it was Target, Elliot said, shrugging. "Anyway, your good buddy Danny's inside." Stewart went off, and Elliot climbed into the car. "Look out, Diane," he yelled, pretending to shield his face. Diane grinned and started the engine. She was about to pull away when she and Elliot heard the sound of a whistle. "We're being called," she remarked good-naturedly. "Hey, Joan Bankhead called from her yard." "You whistled," Elliot called back, smiling. "Hi, Elliot. Hi to you." "You've grown up. Have a way with words," Diane whispered. "How's your book coming?" Elliot called very slowly. "Say, I see you got a chauffeur now. Well, nobody wants to live forever." Laughing, Joan said, "You're so funny." "Not really." "Yes, you are. You're a fun person." Diane leaned on the car horn until Elliot pulled her off it. "I'm ready to barf," she said. "Your talk is grossing me out." Turning quickly to Joan, Elliot called, "I have to go. Are we still waiting? Are we still on for the banquet Wednesday night?" "Wouldn't miss it for the world." "Great. Buckle up, lover boy," Diane said just before she hit the gas pedal. When they had gone a few blocks, Diane said, "Don't you still love Mom?" "Hey," Elliot said, "your mom wouldn't want me to be in mourning for the rest of my life. She'd want me to go out. Are you telling me Mom would want you to be loving it up with Joan?" "What's your language, young lady?" Diane shook her head in disgust. "I'm 17 now," she complained, "and you tell me that loving it up is bad language? I can't believe it." "Well, maybe you're right, but try to understand this, Diane. Of course I will always love your mom. It's been a couple of years now, but things seem to be getting back to normal again in the house. And in 3 days all my hard work is going to pay off. I also finally met someone I like, so you should be happy for me." "Yeah," Diane mumbled, trying to lock her mind on driving. They rode on in silence. Elliot realized his romance with Joan was a sore point for Diane, and probably for Danny, too. Amanda didn't seem to notice. Finally, Diane pulled to the curb opposite his office building. Elliot smiled at her appreciatively. Her driving was very good. "Everything is going to be fine," he said lovingly. "Just 3 more days to go." "Sure," Diane said, giving him a look of affection. "And say, this isn't easy for me, but oh, forget it." "Happy birthday, kiddo," Elliot said, following the words with a kiss. Diane quickly glanced around. She didn't want anyone to see her dad kissing her. She was too old for that. "Elliot," she said with exaggerated indignation. "Sorry, I forgot," he replied mockingly, then took her hand and shook it. "Warmest personal regards." Before Diane could toss off a response, he winked and jumped out of the car, anxious to show the car to Jonelle and some of her other friends at school. Diane immediately pulled away. Elliot watched her go off as he started across the street. His mind was on Diane and a dozen other things, but it should have been on crossing safely. Had it been, he would have seen the car that had shot past a stoplight, racing towards him. Oh my. Chapter 5. As soon as Diane pulled away, she switched on the radio. The music that reached her ears almost gagged her. She quickly punched the other selector switches. The sound seemed to go from bad to disgusting. "There must be something wrong with his hearing," she mumbled to herself. At that moment, almost the same words were being said by the driver of the car that had almost hit Elliot, swerving to avoid an accident. The driver had blasted his horn as he sped by, but Elliot had continued across the street, unaware of how close he had brushed with disaster. Safely on the sidewalk in front of his building, Elliot's mind fixed on work. He had forgotten about an important meeting that he had downtown later in the morning. Now he wished he hadn't given the car away, because he would have to catch the cab downtown. Elliot walked through the lobby and entered the old elevator. It was empty, and as he pressed 12, the elevator's frayed old cables creaked. The creaking sound meant danger, but Elliot was oblivious to it. The elevator stopped on the 3rd floor. About a dozen men got on one by one. The men were the senior directors of Elliot's company. They were also fat, and as each one stepped on, the frayed cables seemed to groan and pop from the weight. "Hello there, Hopper," one man said to Elliot. "Going to your office." "Well, good morning, Mr. Seymour," Elliot said, obviously elated to be greeted by the man. "Yes, I am." "Punch 11 for us, will you?" Mr. Seymour said. "And by the way, how are you coming on our deal?" "We should be closing it right on schedule, tomorrow." "Gentlemen," Mr. Seymour called out, "I trust you all know Elliot Hopper. He was the first to envision the merger, and he's been handling the negotiations. Several men smiled at Elliot. One slapped his arm. Then the elevator started, straining from old age and the weight of its occupants. When we meet on Thursday, Mr. Seymour continued, Papa will be the youngest man to sit on the board of directors of either of our two firms. Elliot didn't want to appear too excited, but he was thrilled by Mr. Seymour's announcement. It was just as he wanted to hear. His long hours and hard work were going to be rewarded. Thanks, he mumbled as one of the men who had congratulated him. That is, Mr. Seymour added, he doesn't mess up between now and then. Elliot realized Seymour was joking, but he wasn't amused. He smiled politely, and Seymour's army of stooges laughed heartily. Warmed by their response, Seymour said, Of course, if we find out that you've been having a secret romance with Mr. Nero's wife, that you've been sorry, excuse me. Again, the sheer passion I have for this lovely story sometimes gets in the way of my ability to read it properly. That is, Mr. Seymour added, if he doesn't mess up between now and then. Elliot realized Seymour was joking, but he wasn't amused. He smiled politely, and Seymour's army of stooges laughed heartily. Warmed by their responses, Seymour said, Of course, if you find out that you've been having a secret romance with Mr. Nero's wife, forget about being on the board. The stooges laughed again just as the elevator stopped at the floor. Seymour stepped off and held the door. As the others stepped off, Elliot said, I don't have any worries. Have you seen Mr. Nero's wife? Give him a better picture. Elliot oinked, and he laughed. No one else laughed. They were busy sneering a look at the old man who had gotten off the next elevator. As soon as Elliot saw him, he felt sick. Mr. Nero, he said with a gasp. Turning up his hearing aid, the old man said, What was that? I said that I haven't seen your wife lately, Elliot replied enthusiastically. Enthusiastically. The tradition amongst my family to not pronounce vowels. Save time. Yes, old man. Growing up for days, but I'm better now. That's good, Elliot said quickly as the doors closed. Elliot breathed a sigh of relief. You were very lucky just now, Elliot, he said. Very lucky. Elliot didn't know how lucky he was, because a little pep talk to himself he didn't hear the elevator's cables snapping. He stepped off the elevator with no thought of its immediate breakneck descent towards the basement. Bureau and Collins, Imports and Exports, he said, enthusiastically reading the sign on his office door. Allow me to introduce Mr. Elliot Hopper, your new director. Elliot bowed jokingly before pushing the door open. At that moment, the sound of the elevator crashing shook the building, but Elliot's good luck was holding. He didn't hear a thing. Inside, he saw Carol Lane, his secretary. She was at her desk, working on a cup of coffee and a donut. Good morning, Elliot, she said. What's going on in here? Months earlier, Elliot had been promised that his small, dark office would be renovated. They had finally gotten around to working on your office, Carol said, and they've put a few new windows in, and everyone else will be ready by the end of the day. I guess all the other offices must have been finished. Thanks for your vote of confidence. What? Nothing, Elliot replied. Let's get started. Brief me on the schedule. He turned abruptly and headed into his office. Carol leapt up and followed after him as she leafed through her notebook. You got negotiations from 1 to 4, she reported, and a 5 o'clock meeting with the board. Elliot's office was in the process of becoming a large, sunlit one, but for the moment he didn't have the time to notice. Can we move the negotiations up to 11 and work through lunch, he asked. I'm hoping to finish up everything today. No problem, Carol said, using what Elliot had described as a favorite expression. With that out of the way, Elliot glanced around. What an office this is going to be, he said, backing up to get a better idea of its spaciousness. Carol didn't respond. She was busy with her notebook. Besides, she hadn't just told Elliot that her new windows were in place. She didn't know the window, the wall of glass he thought he was backing towards, was missing. She certainly didn't know Elliot's next step would give him a free fall to the sidewalk 12 stories below. I love this office, Elliot exclaimed. There's one other thing, Carol said, prompting Elliot to stop. You have a meeting at 10 with Mr. Collins in the bank downtown. Oh, yeah, Elliot said as he turned to look out the missing window. Do you want me to tell you something that is very important? His way and not noticing the missing window, Carol said, What is it? He hit his throat. Neither of them were aware of the missing window. They also weren't aware of the workers backing a huge pane of glass towards Elliot, a pane big enough to send him on his way out the opening. The great views, the big office, and the promotion are not what this is all about, he announced. After all my years of sacrifice and putting my family on hold, the family's future will finally be secure. With that, he stepped towards Carol. Move saved him from the huge pane of glass, and he and Carol hadn't even noticed it. Better not get run over by a bus before Thursday, she said jokingly. Elliot enjoyed her joke. It was the best one he had heard all day. Nothing like that would happen to him, right? He said. Laughed. And hey, you'd better call and get word to Collins that I'll be a little late. Diane has the car. I have to find a cab. Well, don't get run over by a cab, Carol called after him. Elliot laughed all through the ride down the only elevator still working. Sometimes Carol was funny. He was still laughing when he reached street level. Then he became serious and raced outside. Seconds later, he spotted a cab dropping off a passenger and quickly stepped over to it. He didn't notice the elevator repairman rushing by. He also missed the message from the man leaving the cab who whispered, "Don't ride with him." Chapter 6. Take me to First Interstate Bank on Olive, Elliot told the cabbie. As the driver pulled away from the curb, Elliot smiled. He had been fortunate to get a cab right away, and even luckier to get one with a driver who didn't ask for directions. Elliot wanted to think about the meeting with Collins. A minute later, Elliot glanced at the cab's speedometer. "Going kind of fast, aren't we?" he remarked. Twisting around, the driver gave Elliot a vacant stare. For the first time, Elliot noticed the man's face. He needed a shave, and his eyes were bloodshot. The cigarette dangling from his lips didn't help his appearance. Elliot began to wonder if the man staring at him understood English. His vehicle was going as fast as ever. Finally, Elliot pointed out the windshield and said, "I think you might want to look at the road." "Drop dead," the cabbie replied, proving he understood some English. "Thanks," Elliot said. "Later." The driver turned towards the front of his cab. Elliot relaxed slightly and looked at the man's photo license posted on the dashboard. His name was Curtis Birch. Even though his photo was ugly and disgusting, it was accurate. "Do you worship Satan?" the cabbie asked. The question puzzled Elliot. For one thing, it was hard to believe that it had come out of the driver's mouth. For another thing, it was even hard to believe the man was asking Elliot this. "Why, what?" Elliot said incredulously. "Do you accept the Lord Satan as the supreme being? Do you accept evil as your salvation?" Elliot gulped, realizing he was riding with a lunatic, and the lunatic was driving. "I've always meant to get with this Satan stuff," Elliot said softly, "but I've been so busy. You know, things like that are." At the moment, the driver didn't seem aware of Elliot or his words. Bloodshot eyes were fixed on the road ahead, and he was passing red lights faster than Elliot could count them. Finally, he turned towards Elliot and smiled, showing his yellow-stained teeth. "I like you," he said. "Now, do you worship Satan?" Elliot considered leaping from the car. No, he decided, it was going too fast. Bribery seemed like a better idea. He pulled out his wallet and said, "How much do you want to stop this thing?" The lunatic didn't respond. He seemed to be in a trance. "Oh no," Elliot thought. "He's become an idiot." "I'll give you $20 to stop," Elliot called. "In fact, you can make that $40. The lunatic responded by stepping down on the gas pedal. "Are you a moron?" Elliot mumbled. No, I take that back. Let's see, I have $76. You can have it. If you please stop the car. Barry. The wild-eyed lunatic acted as if he hadn't heard the offer, and Elliot felt frightened. "I'll throw in the wallet," he said. "It's from Gucci. I'm sure it'll impress all your buddies in Satan's village." The lunatic grabbed the wallet immediately and stomped on the gas pedal. "You stop this vehicle right now," Elliot roared. "Do you worship Satan?" "Worship him," Elliot replied, deciding to try another approach. "I am Satan, and I command you to stop." The news obviously distressed the madman driving, and he twisted around for another look at Elliot before he let out a terror-filled scream. Matching the scream, Elliot pointed at the barrage railing, towards which the cab was racing. The cab driver hit the brake, but he acted too late. A second later, they slammed into the railing. The impact dumped Elliot onto the floor, and as soon as the sounds of glass breaking and steel crunching ended, he realized he had come through the crash unmarked. He climbed up and looked into the front seat. The driver groaned, but seemed all right. "Nice going, dimwit," Elliot remarked sarcastically. "Could have killed us." The driver groaned again as Elliot decided he had enough of the driver on the ride. "See you around," he announced, opening his door and stepping out. Elliot shrieked in horror and reached for something to stop his fall. The cab was dangling precariously over the edge of the bridge, and Elliot was headed for a plunge into the river far below. He managed to grab the door handle and lock his grip on it. Taking pains to move carefully, Elliot slowly inched his way back into the cab and slumped into the back seat. "Why do things like this have to happen to me?" asked no one in particular as he shifted his position. The car leaned with his movement, and the driver screamed. Elliot immediately shifted back to his previous spot, and the cab moved with him. Okay, he told the driver. Now try to be calm. Yes, evil master. Elliot couldn't believe his ears. The man was definitely a moron. There was no sense in trying to pretend he was only a lunatic. Elliot cautiously eyed the driver, who eyed Elliot's wallet on the front passenger seat. Master, he said, reaching across the seat. Your wallet. No, don't move. It's a Gucci, the driver said, continuing his lean across the seat. No, Elliot cried. It's a fake! An imitation! It was made in Hackensack! Oh no, Elliot thought as the cab slid sideways slightly before slanting towards the river. A moment later it slammed into the water and disappeared below the surface. Elliot wasn't sure, but he guessed he had passed out when the cab hit the water. He didn't remember waking, and he certainly couldn't remember going out and swimming to dry ground. He had done it, though, and he had climbed all the way back to the scene of the crash. He felt exhausted. Struggling to catch his breath, Elliot spotted a cab standing by the broken railing. Officer, he called. It was terrible. The car is underwater. The cop didn't respond. His face appeared to be twisted in pain. Bad, Elliot said. There's another guy down there. The driver. He must have drowned. He worshipped the devil. This time the cop twisted around Elliot and threw up. Elliot jumped back. Too late. What's the matter with you? He said. You're not supposed to fall apart when things like this happen. I'm reporting you, pal, for puking on an accident victim. The cop gagged again and lurched towards Elliot. That's it for you, buddy, Elliot announced angrily as he jumped back into the roadway. A split second later, he sensed something behind him and whirled around. The bus plowed into him, and almost as soon as he caught a glimpse of it, the event was a momentary nightmare for Elliot until he realized that half of his body seemed to be inside the bus. He was in the aisle looking at the passengers, but they had no idea he was moving past them. Next thing he knew, he was standing in the middle of the road, alone. The bus had gone through him. Watching the bus roll away, Elliot didn't want to consider the thought creeping into his head. Finally, he realized he couldn't forget about what had just happened. Oh no! He screamed as the thought turned to reality. Oh no! Sorry, I'm up a bit. Brilliant monologue. Oh no. Famous passages 4 times. It's to me. So eloquent, emotional. It's the greatest. This book is just so brilliant. Sometimes you just stop and think about it. Chapter 7. While Elliot struggled to face his new situation, Diane struggled to face the front right fender on her birthday present. Jolene, she whispered to a friend, tell me it's not dented. Well, Jolene said soothingly, it's not dented real bad. Great! Diane roared, kicking the stage on. She'd accidentally tally. Fucking shit. I cannot read at all of a sudden. You'll have to excuse me, it's just the emotions are just so raw and powerful that it makes it difficult to read some of these beautiful poetry, tapestry of words that make up this marvelous tome. Let's start chapter 7 again. While Elliot struggled to face his new situation, Diane struggled to face the front right fender on her birthday present. Jonelle, she whispered to a friend, tell me it's not dented. Well, Janelle said soothingly, it's not dented real bad. Great, Diane roared, kicking at the stanchion she had accidentally hit. Can you tell me how a flimsy steel pole like this one could dent the fender of a car? I don't know, Janelle shrugged, but I heard that cars like yours weren't too hot in accidents. Not too hot is an understatement. I barely bumped that pole, you know. I certainly do. And I'm willing to tell your father. Elliot! If he even sees the dent, my days of driving are over. I have to get it fixed right now. Is that possible? No. Why not? Well, for one thing, I don't think people in body shops are just sitting around with nothing to do. For another, you should probably don't have the money to pay for the repairs, and even if we were able to find someone who would fix it, and we don't even bother to ask what they're thinking about asking. I'm broke! Frantic, panicked story. It's beautiful. Beautiful. It's just beautiful. There's not much more one can say. It's a beautiful, beautiful story. And my laptop is unplugged. So I need to fix that post haste, lest this recording be lost to the ages. That would be a travesty. Alright. I was going to ask if you knew anybody with money, Diane said. You're always broke. Jonelle laughed. Sorry for laughing, she said. But you know me as well as I know you. We're just like sisters. Yeah, so you can go home and tell Dad the bad news? Not give up yet, Jonelle remarked cheerfully. For a while, the two of them leaned against the car and pondered possible solutions. What about the shop at school? Diane finally asked. The waiting list is 3 months long. I know for sure because Ralph Kirko told me last week. Ralph Kirko! Diane said as her eyes brightened. He must be interested in helping me. Outrageous, Jonelle replied. They both laughed. Ralph wasn't the grossest guy in Union Hill High, but he was right up there with the top 10 weirdos, spitting on other students at the cafeteria with his idea of fun. Still, there were some good things to be said about Ralph. For one, he liked Diane. For another, he was supposed to be great at car repairs. We're going to invite him to sit with us during lunch, Diane said. He might be able to tell us what to do. He might be able to tell you what to do. My car is indented. I just hope you aren't going to have to go out with him for his help. Are you kidding? That would be worse than telling Elliot. Say, we'd better get moving before our independent study time is gone. Once they were seated in the library, Diane found she couldn't study. The dented fender occupied her thoughts. Her father certainly wouldn't like it, but would he notice it? He was so occupied with his work that he didn't even seem to notice many things lately. And even though she wanted to kid herself and show off her birthday present, she knew she had forgotten all about her birthday. Still, she loved him. He loved her. He was under a lot of pressure at work, it showed. Diane didn't want to add to it by making him think his daughter couldn't drive safely. He would get the car fixed if she could. No way, Ralph Curcio said as soon as he looked at the fender. You did some job on it. Your old man will probably ground you for life. Thanks, Ralph, Jonelle said sarcastically. My friend needed some inspirational words from you. A belated birthday wish, but very nice of you. What is she talking about? Ralph asked. Nothing. It's just you were the only hope I had. Well, I can make it look a lot better than it does now, but it's not going to look perfect. Bad will it look, Ralph, Jonelle said, weakly imitating Johnny Carson. It'll look repaired, Ralph shrugged. Wouldn't want anyone to know I did it because I'd like to keep my reputation. Don't tell anyone, Diane promised, and neither will Jonelle. That's right, Ralph. Our lips are sealed. For a moment, Ralph stared distrustfully at Jonelle. Then he said, I'll fix the fender for you after school, Diane. Drive over to my house. I have the tools in the garage. Come along. My mom doesn't like girls hanging around me. Does that happen a lot? Jonelle said, wide-eyed. I'll be there alone, Ralph, Diane quickly replied. See you then, Ralph said as he started to walk away. How much is it going to cost? Diane called after him. I'm doing it as your birthday present, Ralph called back. As soon as he was out of earshot, Diane whirled towards Jonelle and said, Does that happen a lot? Couldn't believe you said that. Couldn't complain myself. Mom doesn't like girls hanging around me. Ralph does have his problems. Diane laughed. Yeah, she agreed. He's sort of sweet. He's giving me a terrific birthday present. Didn't see it yet, Jonelle said cynically before adding, But I think the fender will probably look great. Guys around school say that Ralph is the #1 at working on cars. Later that day, Diane became convinced about Ralph's ability cars. Using some tools she had never seen before, Ralph managed to reshape the fender into a nearly new condition. These paint chips, he said, pointing, are something you're going to have to live with. I don't trust touch-up paint. It doesn't always match. A wonderful job, Diane said, hugging him mystically. Why my totally legitimate accent always up on sarcastically. But it does. Statistically. They were in Ralph's driveway, and he pushed Diane away as fast as he could. His embarrassed look made Diane feel sorry about her spontaneous gesture. Guess I got a little carried away, she said apologetically, but I do appreciate what you've done. Okay, Ralph replied, but don't tell anyone. Promised. I won't. You have my word. That Diane quickly climbed out into the car and took off. She was supposed to meet her father outside his office to take him home. Judging by the time, she decided she would be late if traffic was heavy, but her dad was rarely on time either. As she rode, she thought a lot about the help Ralph had given her. He was a lot nicer than she and Jonelle had thought. In fact, he was shy. Maybe Diane thought he spit at people because he was shy, and she laughed at the idea. He wasn't weird. She was. She laughed again, but one thought about the day's events stuck in her mind. Amazing how much you learn about it. When I was at the academy for preparation of young school children, I spit on all of the pores all of the time. It was a lovely delight. Occupied many a lunch period. Oh, I yearn for those days. Chapter 8. Unlike Diane, Elliot Hopper wasn't happy about what he had learned by accident. That's some nice callbacks to a sentence ago. Passive writing. Since the boss had plowed through him, he had been wandering around town trying to coax himself into facing the matter head-on. The afternoon coming to an end, Elliot realized he had no choice. Get on with it, he told himself as he stepped over the mirrored wall of downtown building. People passed the wall, they checked out their reflections. Some looked to see how they had come through on a busy work day, while others looked to see how beautiful and handsome they appeared. When Elliot looked, he just hoped he appeared, in any condition. Fortunately, he made no reflection. Okay, he said. I know I have to come right out and admit that I'm dead. Well, I just sort of said it. Okay, I am dead. Elliot was calm for a moment, letting the idea sink in. Then he screamed, I hate the idea! I don't see how I'm going to get used to it. Elliot stopped. No one was listening. People were just passing him by, not paying a bit of attention. He trotted over to a group of businessmen and made his faces at them. He had ridiculed the way one guy was walking, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't get a response from anyone. It just didn't seem right. Don't understand why they don't give you a warning, Elliot said sadly. They don't come and whisper, skip the oat bran, it can't help you. No one would be nice. No, that would be the nice way to do it. I could have enjoyed a few good breakfasts. I could have finished cleaning up the garage. I was going to order those tapes and learn Japanese in the car. But I thought I had more time, so I didn't learn Japanese. I could be dead without it. I am dead. I just don't think it should have been like this. I thought people would be wearing white robes and playing hops. Instead, I get a policeman in blue signaling my demise by barfing on me. Elliot paused, recalling something he had once seen in a Reader's Digest about self-pity being destructive. Wait a minute, he told himself. You're looking at this death stuff all the wrong way. You need to examine the good side of it. You're invisible. Your son Danny would love to be invisible. Danny! Oh no, I forgot about the kids. Forget about you. Strange. After Mother. Elliot immediately decided to go home. He knew it was a long walk, but he wasn't going to let that stop him. After all, a walk wouldn't kill him. After a few blocks, Elliot stopped. What am I doing? He asked. Oscar Malin, that boring jerk who lives up the street from us, works around here. He should be getting off in a while. I'll ride with him. It didn't take Elliot long to find Malin's car, step through the passenger door, and sit down. As he waited, he chuckled to himself. Malin was in for the ride of his dull life. When Oscar Malin got his car 15 minutes later, he had every reason to believe he was alone. After starting off, he flipped on his cassette player. He was anxious to hear more of the tape book he had started listening to that morning, Laying Your Retirement Nest Egg. Elliot needed 2 minutes of listening. After that, he reached over and ejected the cassette. My retirement eggs have been cooked, he remarked. Elliot's move startled Malin, but he'd had trouble with the player before, so he immediately pressed the tape back into operation. A second later, it jumped out of the player and sailed to the back seat. That did it, he said. The lousy dealer is going to replace the player. I'm not listening to any more of his garbage about needing an adjustment. Malin turned the radio to a talk show. The subject under discussion was rude cab drivers. Elliot reached and switched to a music station. Malin shook his head in disgust and dialed the talk show again. Elliot leaned over and pressed on the horn. Malin slapped the steering wheel, and Elliot responded by stopping with the horn and turning off the radio. "He's going to replace the car," Malin grumbled. They rode on. Elliot directed his thoughts to the kids. Death was going to come as a big shock to them. He understood. He wasn't over it himself yet. The blast of a police siren interrupted his thoughts. He turned and saw the cruiser with his blinking red lights. The driver wanted Malin to pull over. "What is it?" Malin asked as soon as the police officer stepped up to his door and glared at him. "You were blowing your horn back there. Don't tell me you don't know anything about our new anti-noise ordinance." "I know about it," Malin replied. "I'm all for it, but I can't do much about the horn that goes off by itself." "Oh," the police officer said, looking at Malin like he was a mental case. "It went off by itself. How interesting. Was it upset by the traffic?" "Now see here, officer, I am not crazy. I was driving along and the horn sounded. Maybe there's a short in the system. I don't know, but I'll take the car in tomorrow and find out. Believe me, I'm sorry about the noise." "All right," the officer replied, "and I'm sorry for not believing you at first. It's been a long day. Anyways, good evening." As the officer walked off, Elliot reached for the horn, and then he stopped. He wanted to get home. It would be fun to see Malin handcuffed and hauled off, but it wouldn't help Elliot. He reached over and turned on the radio. The news was on, telling him about the accident by the bridge. Malin switched over to another station. "Hey!" Elliot cried. "I was listening to that!" Malin didn't hear a word Elliot said, and he didn't seem to care about the radio changing stations for no reason. He just kept switching back to the station he wanted. Finally, Elliot gave up, deciding Malin was a simpleton as well as boring. The rest of the ride, Elliot focused on giving Malin a safe and sane send-off, finally opting to settle for a safe one. As the car was about to pass his house, Elliot turned off the engine. Malin braked to stop, but Elliot threw the shift lever into park and removed the keys from the ignition. "What the devil is happening?" Malin called, boiling with frustration. Elliot stepped through the car door, allowing Malin to see his keys seemingly sail through the window. Malin immediately slid across the front seat and got out the passenger side in pursuit of his keys. By then, Elliot was stepping through the car, holding the keys down low so they appeared to be running on the ground under the car. From a kneeling position, Malin saw the keys. He watched as they slid inside the muffler clamp and seemed to lock there. "Don't get dirty," Elliot said. "Don't touch the muffler. It's hot." While Malin wondered if there was something a lot more wrong with his car than he imagined, Elliot headed for his house. When he got in the front door, he reached for the knob, but his forward motion sent him right through the door. He paused and listened. "Hey, Amanda," Denny said, his voice carrying from the den. "Take a look at this. Mr. Malin is crawling under his car and is wearing a suit. He must be out of his mind. Dad always says he's out of his mind." "Dad always said," Elliot corrected, puzzling how he could break the news to Amanda and Danny. Chapter 9. "Forget about Mr. Malin," Amanda told the brother. "This is exciting." Elliot tiptoed to the den. As he got closer, he could hear the TV playing. He quickly stepped into the room, which was dark except for the flickering television screen. Amanda and Danny were on the floor in front of it, watching intently. "What's going to happen to them?" Elliot asked himself. "Who's going to take care of them?" Turning from the TV, Danny said, "Hi, Dad." "Hi, Dan," Elliot began. "Hi, Daddy," Amanda added, smiling up at him. "You're home early for a change," Danny remarked. "That's nice." Elliot's jaw dropped. What had happened to them? They seemed all right, yet they could see him. "You can see me?" he asked tentatively. "What was that, Dad?" Danny said, staring at him. "You can see me?" Elliot repeated. "This is fantastic. I'm on my way back. Maybe I'm not even officially dead." "Dad," Danny said, "what are you talking about?" "I'm asking you if you can really, honestly see me." Danny frowned. "Not funny. Moving your mouth and not saying anything isn't much of a joke. Besides, I know there's nothing wrong with my hearing because I've been listening to the TV for over an hour." "Not funny," Amanda agreed. "You really can't hear me," Elliot said, wondering if he had lost his mind when his body came back. "What's wrong with Daddy?" Amanda asked. "That's what I'd like to know," Diane called into the den. "I was supposed to pick him up after work, but he didn't show. His secretary told me she hadn't seen him since this morning." The time Diane mentioned Elliot's secretary, she had reached the den. "Where were you?" she asked her father as she hit the light switch. Diane and the others jumped in fright. Elliot was gone. "Now where did he go?" Diane asked. "Daddy!" Amanda cried out. What are you two talking about? Elliot said. I'm right over here. That's amazing, Diane remarked. He just vanished. Dad, Danny called. That's a fabulous trick. Where are you? I'm right here, Elliot replied in a tone that reflected his frustration. I got it, Danny said enthusiastically. Diane, turn off the light. Diane, hit the switch, and like clockwork, Elliot appeared. Excellent trick, Danny said, adding a vocal imitation of a cheer from the crowd grandstand. Danny's interest in magic kept him from sitting still. He rushed over to the light switch and flicked it on and off. Elliot disappeared and reappeared as fast as Danny could flip the switch. The system is down. The cheat is grounded. I don't like this, Amanda protested. It's obviously based on some sort of optical illusion, Danny speculated, continuing to flip the switch. I hate this whole thing, Diane told Danny, so would you please stop with the lights? Danny stopped with the switch in the off position, and the look on Elliot's face indicated he had thought of something. Diane got to the idea as soon as he pointed to himself. Aye, she called out. Getting the first word in the game of charades Elliot seemed intent on playing. Elliot smiled and nodded in agreement. Next, he signaled for a small word. Have a very small, Diane called out. Elliot immediately replaced his signal. I am, Danny concluded. After nodding in approval, Elliot went into what he thought was a clear, simple imitation of a ghost, raising his arms and pretending to float. A fish, Amanda called. A modern dancer, Diane added. Elliot shook his head and tried the imitation again, adding more emphasis on his floating. A big sissy, Amanda called. Not wanting to be outdone, Danny called, You're an owl! You're a bat! You're a river rat! Elliot gestured excitedly for them to stop. He was dead and his kid was driving him crazy. The whole thing seemed to be getting out of his hand. After rejecting the idea of turning on the light, Elliot pulled off his jacket and draped it over his head. You're a transvestite, Danny called. What? Danny called, and Diane threw a pillow at her brother. Isn't a vest some kind of clothing? Amanda asked. Elliot tossed the jacket aside and tugged on his earlobe. His kids recognized the signal immediately. In response, he pretended to be raising a wine glass. Sounds like a glass, Amanda suggested. A drink, Diane said. Elliot shook his head and pretended to be toasting someone with his glass. Sounds like a toast, Diane guessed. Elliot's enthusiasm excited Diane and the others. They were getting close. The game was getting interesting. You want to boast? Danny called. No, Amanda said as her daddy shook his head. You're a ghost, Harry. Elliot jumped with joy, and Diane and Danny seemed puzzled. You're a ghost, Diane mumbled. He's a ghost, Danny said, expecting to learn how to pull off the same trick for his friends. Elliot went on, holding his hands as if they were steering wheel. You're driving a car? Diane said first. Nodding appreciatively, Elliot bounced his head up and down rapidly. Driving a car, though. Cab. And even really consistent is bullshit. I mean, the greatest literature of all time. And you went over something, Diane excitedly added. The game tension heightened. Diane and the others sensed they were close to a solution. They could almost smell victory as Elliot held his nose and puffed up his cheeks. Something stinks, Amanda guessed. No, Danny said. You went into the water. Yes, Diane agreed. You had an accident and went into the water. Elliot felt thrilled. They were moving towards victory like a precision machine. He and his kids were a team, moving like champions. Folding his arms over his chest, he closed his eyes and tried to appear as stiff as a dead body. You drowned, Danny said eagerly. That's it! You're a ghost! You're dead! For a moment, Elliot jumped with joy, and the kid shared his enthusiasm. Then the details of their discovery seemed to hit home. Their smiles disappeared. Elliot half-heartedly tried to soften the shock with one more attempt at his ghost imitation. It fell flat. The game was definitely over. He carefully eyed Amanda. She seemed to be puzzling over the abrupt change in her sister and brother. All of a sudden, she shuddered with fright and ran to Elliot, raising her arms for him to reach out and pull her to him with a big hug. Amanda's attempt at jumping to her daddy's arms was a heartbreaking event. Like a loving daddy, Elliot reached out for her just before she passed right through him and fell to the floor. Sadly, he looked down on his little girl on the floor crying. Oh, Amanda, he said, though no one could hear. Danny and Diane rushed across the room and picked up their weeping sister. Is Daddy going away like Mommy? She asked. Diane flashed a don't answer look at Danny. She didn't think either of them really knew the answer, but she certainly didn't want her brother to make up some flip remark that might upset Amanda even more. Danny's eyes immediately told her he agreed, and they both turned towards their dad. Elliot was shaking his head with determination. He wasn't going away. He wanted to make that clear. He wanted to make a lot of things clear. He could feel his rage building. Dad, Danny said, try telepathy. I read somewhere that ghosts can communicate with telepathy. You can do it. Just concentrate. We're with you, Diane added, immediately concentrating. Danny and Amanda joined their sister, thinking hard about making communications work. Seeing the show of support, Elliot decided to try. He closed his eyes, and within a few seconds, his face twisted into an expression of deep concentration. Chapter 10. Minutes later, Elliot groaned. Diane, Danny, and Amanda opened their eyes. Okay, Elliot's voice said. Now we're testing. 1, 2, 3. I hear it, Diane reported. Me too, Danny added, wondering if being a ghost had something to do with ventriloquism. That's just great, Elliot's voice said, and again his lips did not move. This time his facial expressions and hand movements seemed to go along with the words. Now I know this is confusing, but be patient. Dad, Diane said, this is so weird. Can you move your lips, or is there something wrong with them? Concentrate, Danny suggested. Clearing his throat as he attempted to follow Danny's suggestion, Elliot said haltingly, I am moving my lips as I speak. How do I look and sound? Diane and Danny exchanged worried glances. He sounded like a robot, a malfunctioning one at that. Good, Diane said, forcing a smile. Joining her, Danny said, yeah, Dad, you're doing great. That's bad, huh? Elliot said without moving his lips. Well, listen to this. I'm really getting the hang of it now. That's a little better, Diane said weakly. Elliot tried again and again. Finally, he decided to explain his repeated efforts. Look, he said, I know that this is a little peculiar, but between now and Thursday, we're going to have to make sure no one catches on me being a ghost. What good is that going to do? Diane asked. You can get life insurance after you're dead. Elliot explains, the same is true for our pension plan. Companies are very strict about things like that, so we just have to make it to Thursday, and you kids will be taken care of. I don't believe this, Diane said matter-of-factly. Are you going away like Mommy did? Amanda asked. Elliot bent down towards Amanda, taking care that she wouldn't go through him. No, sweetie, his voice said. I'm not going anywhere. Staying right here. It was almost as if Elliot had uttered some magic words. Dangerous magic words. A second later, his body lifted off the floor. He started floating up and out of the room. Cracker. What a thrill ride. A second later, his body lifted off the floor and he started floating up and out of the room. Whoa! Stop! Called, trying to grab for something to disrupt his movement. Diane, Danny, and Amanda were watched in shocked silence. When their dad passed through the ceiling and out of the house, they ran to the window and looked for him. After a while, it was obvious Elliot was gone. Diane wrapped her arm around Amanda and closed her eyes. Danny stared out the window, stunned at the unexpected disappearance of his dad. Tried to convince himself, Dad, come back. Diane opened her eyes. She was smiling again and said, Don't look so worried, Amanda. Daddy has to get used to being a ghost. You saw how he had to concentrate, talk with us. He needs to do the same thing about flying, and he will. He may take a while, but he'll be back. Until then, we have to be sure that no one finds out about... The phone interrupted Diane. Is that Daddy? Amanda asked. I'll get it, Danny announced. Don't think it could be Daddy, Diane said, secretly wishing it was Elliot. Hello, Danny, Joan said. Is your dad around? It's Joan, Danny whispered, holding his hand over the receiver. Should we tell her about what's going on? No! Diane said emphatically. Danny, do you hear me? Oh, yes, Joan, Danny replied. I just wanted to make sure my dad hadn't sneaked in without my seeing him. Anyway, he isn't home yet, probably working late at the office as usual. You want me to leave a note for him to call you? A note? Joan said, thinking. No, I guess not. I'll try to catch up with him tomorrow. Okay, Danny said, smiling wickedly at Diane, but if he comes flying in soon, I'll have him call you. As soon as Danny put down the receiver, Diane said, Sometimes I think you're crazy, Daniel. How could you joke about this? Glancing at Amanda, Danny replied, I thought it might be a good idea. May fly soon, Amanda said sincerely. Yeah, Diane agreed, winking at Danny. We still have to keep this matter a secret. Joan doesn't know Daddy can fly. Right, Amanda agreed. So you keep quiet, Danny. I think I'll order some pizza for our dinner. Diane said, realizing it was getting late. Amanda and Danny immediately voiced approval for the suggestion, and Diane called in the order. A second later, the phone rang again, and Diane answered. "Hello, this is Carol Lane," Elliot's secretary said. "Is your father home? I haven't heard from him. I really should go home." "Should have called you," Diane replied, thinking of Elliot's repeated concerns about Thursday. "I'm terribly sorry. My dad called and said he had stopped at a quiet place to consider everything that might happen on Thursday. He said he'd be home late." "Strange," Carol said, sounding puzzled. "Well, you know how my dad is. He always does a lot of strange things." "Yes," Carol agreed, though still bewildered. "I guess so. Just tell him I'll see him tomorrow." "I'll tell him you called, Carol." Amanda had gone off to look at the TV. As soon as Diane put down the receiver, Danny whispered, "What if he doesn't come back?" "I don't want to think about that. No matter what happens, we have to hold on until Thursday. Now, there's a day he's not going to miss if he can help it. And if he does miss it, I just got through saying that I don't want to think about that, Danny. On Thursday, we can start worrying about it." Danny couldn't argue. Diane changed the subject by telling him about how she had dented his car fender. When she finished the story, he immediately rushed outside to check the repair work. "It looked good to me," he reported when he returned. The sound of the doorbell cut off Diane's replies. She guessed it was the pizza. "Made it to you on time," the delivery man said with a proud, wide-eyed look in his face, "and believe me, really had to fly to do it." Giving him a good tip along with the payment, Diane said, "Thanks, and I'm sure you didn't fly. You don't arrive in a car when you fly." The delivery man took his money and departed, thinking there was no sense in getting into a discussion with the girl. He had delivered there before, and the girl's father was even weirder. They gave good tips, though. After dinner, Danny recalled the fender and said, "I don't think you have to tell Dad about it." "I am going to tell him," Diane replied. "I wouldn't want him to think I was hiding it from him." "I guess you're right," Danny agreed. "I just wish he would get here soon." "So do I," Diane replied, but she was beginning to wonder if she could tell Elliot anything ever again. That was the first 10 chapters. I'm going to read the whole thing. We're about a little over a third of the way through. I will be right back. I just need to get some of the finest bottled water into my gullet. This cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's melted Arctic sea ice. It's imported. It's very, very fancy. And my recording setup is so fancy and not at all rigged together that I can't pause and then start it back up again for sure. So yes, I will be right back. Lovelies. Alright, I've hydrated my vocal cords and we are ready to continue reading one of the greatest stories ever told. I'm sorry that you had to deal with those seconds of silence. I know it must have been horrible to not hear my brilliant, soothing billionaire voice in your eardrums. Chapter 11. Not long after Elliot had appeared to fly off, he found himself floating through the ceiling of another house. He didn't know how far he had traveled, but as soon as he dropped slowly into a room that appeared to be someone's study, he glanced at the books lining the wall and guessed it was far from home. Elliot came to rest, landing gently on a large oak desk. Stretched out there, he spotted a tall, middle-aged man busy doing some paperwork. As soon as he looked up from the work, the man smiled cordially at his confused guest and said in a distinct British accent, "Hello there, Mr. Hopper. Be with you in just a moment." Elliot didn't respond. He just watched the man, who seemed to be rushing to complete the paperwork. Finally, the man looked towards Elliot and said, "Be a good fellow and get off the desk, won't you?" As soon as Elliot was off the desk, he brushed off his clothing and looked around. The room certainly didn't match any idea he ever had about heaven, but he was sure he could get used to it. Besides, he had to get used to it. A minute or so later, the British-sounding chap pulled out a folder and, after briefly studying its contents, smiled at Elliot and said, "Awfully glad to have you here, Mr. Hopper. By the way, when did you die?" Concentrating hard, Elliot said, "This morning." "Say, old chap, you're not at all in synchronization." The man opened his briefcase and pulled out 2 electrical leads with rubber tips at the end of each lead. He held the tips out to Elliot and said, "Be a good fellow and put these on your forefingers." Elliot wanted to laugh out loud, but he held off. Heaven definitely wasn't what he had imagined. He slipped his fingers into the tips and watched as the man seemed to be adjusting some dials on his briefcase. Now, when did you die? The man asked. Again, Elliot concentrated and said, This morning. The words sounded clearer, and the man adjusted the dials once more and said, Cause of death? I drowned in a taxicab, Elliot said perfectly. The man removed the rubber tips on Elliot's fingers and glanced at him. Elliot couldn't hide his pleasure. He beamed at his success until the man insulted him by laughing. I'm really quite sorry, the man said, seriously attempting to contain his laughter. And where did this particular tragedy take place, Harry? USA, planet Earth. By the way, this is heaven, right? Don't be silly, the man replied as he selected some medical instruments seemingly for use on Elliot. Then this is hell, Elliot said with some trepidation. Oh, thank you very much, the man said irately. Do I come into your home and tell you it's reminiscent of some sort of inferno? Do I tell you this is some stinking sweltering cesspool? Without waiting for an answer, the man went to work on measuring Elliot's hand with some calipers. Stand very still while I do this, he warned. Elliot stiffened the command and said, Where am I? You're in London, old Bane. Well, Elliot realized the man's answer went a long way in explaining his accent. He couldn't think of another thing he'd explained. While he puzzled over the response, the man went about his business, making measurements on Elliot and writing them down. Finally, Elliot said, Excuse me, sir, but this has been an extraordinary day for me. So I wonder if you'd be kind enough to answer me one little question. What the hell am I doing in London? Acting just like an American, I'm afraid, the man announced as he stepped away from Elliot. Left our good manners home on the range, have we? What am I doing here? Elliot replied, unable to hide the rage building within him. Actually, I summoned you here. I sense a disturbance in the spirit ether, which is always a sure sign of intercorporeal maltransference. A what? The man picked up a device and looked at like one of those treasure detectors Elliot had seen advertised in magazines and started running it all over Elliot's body. It means they seem to have screwed up, the man explained as he wrote down his readings from Elliot's body. It's the afterlife equivalent of misplacing the paperwork. It's rare, but it happens. Anyway, this is what you might call a specialty of mine. I've written the book on it. To support this point, the man showed Elliot a book titled On Intercorporeal Maltransference. Elliot took note of the author's name, Sir Edith Moser. I believe I might have gone to primary school. Fellow. Very interesting, Elliot remarked. Glad you think so. Now let's get on with my research. No, Elliot said. I've got to go back. You have the power to send me back, don't you? Why, of course I can send you back, but why, pray tell, would I want to? Listen, after Thursday I'll come back and you can research every inch of my dead body. Thursday? You really must excuse me if I laugh. What's so funny? You're in a temporary state right now, the Englishman explained. I've never known anyone to last more than 3 days in your condition, and most go in less. The news caught Elliot off guard. What happens then? He said hesitantly. The endless snooze, I'm afraid. That settles it, Elliot replied. I have to make it a Thursday. Well, your readings are strong. Have you started to flicker yet? Not that I know of. You might make it to Wednesday, even that night, but not to Thursday. It's quite impossible. Elliot stopped. The man had sort of pronounced his death sentence, except for one thing. Elliot was already out of it. In the meantime, though, he had to do something for Diane and the others. I must go back and try, he asserted. It's for my kids. They are so young, and their mama died a few years ago, and all they've got. What do you say, Sir Edith? Edith, he said, correcting Elliot's pronunciation. The first syllable has a short sound. I would have bet it should sound like his name, Elliot said, but either way, it's a girl's name. See, Edith is not a girl's name. I should know. I'm sorry, how did you get the name? I was named after my grandmama. Your grandmother was named Edith? No, her name was Edith. The first syllable was an E and sounded like it. So that proves you have a girl's name. I do not, Sir Edith said. Now please stand still so I can get your measurements right. No, Elliot protested, moving from side to side. You got to send me back. I can't let my kids down again, please. Frowning slightly, Sir Edith said, "All right, I'll send you back, but I'm going to need you for further readings. Do we have a deal, as you Americans say?" "Sure, whatever you want." Off you go, Godspeed." Then Sir Edith pushed a button on one of his many odd-looking devices, and Elliot shot towards the ceiling. "Whoa!" he called just before he passed through the ceiling. "I don't want to get killed twice." "I'd like to kick that man in his dead backside," Sir Edith grumbled, thinking he might have committed a terrible error by allowing Elliot Hooper to return to the USA. Suspense. Chapter 12. "The Cosby Show is on now," Diane told her brother and sister. "You always say you love it. Why aren't you watching it instead of staring out the window?" "I'm waiting for Daddy," Amanda explained. "So am I," Danny confessed. "Just waiting around in this dining room isn't going to bring him back," Diane remarked. "You were there by the window when we got here," Danny said. "Besides, I really wouldn't want to watch The Cosby Show now. With Dad missing, he looks a lot like Bill Cosby. Did you ever notice that?" I mean, what a brilliant connection to the real world. It's truly a masterpiece. "Elliot," Diane said, sneering at her brother, "when Dad gets back, I'm telling him you need your eyes checked. He doesn't look one bit like Bill Cosby." "Yes, he does," Amanda said seriously. Diane was just about to offer Amanda some advice about her eye when Elliot popped through the ceiling. "Hey," he called, "look who's back!" "Dad!" Danny said excitedly. "Daddy!" Amanda screamed. Darn, Diane thought, he does look a bit like Bill Cosby. As the kids watched, Elliot waved his arms, trying to show his downward motion. Nearing floor level, he braced himself somewhat for a crash landing. Instead, he saw his feet passing through the dining room floor and quickly flapped his arms, hoping to keep him from disappearing once again. Somehow, Elliot managed to stop himself. Half his body had gone through the floor, and the other half, which appeared to be sticking up out of the floor, was at an angle. Still, Elliot concluded it was better than being in the basement. "Are you okay?" Danny asked. "I think so," Elliot answered, "and I'll be even better once I get used to this flying stuff." "We thought you might," Diane started to say. "I know," Elliot said, interrupting, "but it's okay, I'm back." Diane and the others eyed with him for concern. He was struggling to get his legs through the floor, but their concern seemed to be about having a ghost dad. "Everything's going to be fine," Elliot lied. "Where did you go?" Danny asked. "I was in London with a guy named Edith." Diane and Danny exchanged looks of obvious disbelief. "Okay," Diane said. "If you don't want to tell us where you go, it's fine with us." Amanda's judgment wasn't that harsh. She sat on the floor and looked at a part of her daddy sticking out of the floor. "Can I take you to show and tell?" she asked. "No, Amanda, you can't. I'm sorry, but that's the way it has to be. If anyone asks, you just tell them everything around here is perfectly normal. And that goes for all of you, okay?" Amanda and the others nodded in agreement as the phone sounded. "I'll get it," Diane announced. "Who could that be?" Elliot said, thinking out loud. "I guess I'm going to have to stick around here. We'll have to tell people I'm not feeling well." "It's Mr. Collins," Diane said. "He sounds like he's seen a ghost." "Not funny," Elliot said as the phone she had thrust at him kept passing through his ghost hand. "Concentrate," Danny said encouragingly. Elliot tried, locking his mind on the phone. A few seconds later, he picked it up and said, "Mr. Collins." After explaining that he was still at the office with Mr. Nero, Collins said, "Things are falling apart, Hooper. I don't know where you are all day, but there were a lot of people waiting for you, and you didn't have the good business sense to call and say you were standing them up." "Mr. Collins," Elliot protested weakly, "I assure you." Collins cut him off. "You better not blow this deal, Hooper," he said, "or perhaps you want me to recite all the mean things I will personally do to you." "Not necessary," Elliot said, and hung up. "Is that bad?" Danny asked. "Bad enough," Elliot admitted, "but it'll be a lot worse if I don't think of a way to go to work tomorrow. For now, you kids can help me by going about your usual business and giving me a chance to concentrate on getting the rest of my body into this room." An hour later, Elliot called Amanda and the others to the living room. There he outlined his plan he had devised for going to work the next morning. It wasn't a spectacular plan, but as Danny remarked, it was worth a shot. That out of the way, Elliot sent Amanda off to bed. After first demonstrating it was impossible for him to kiss her goodnight. Later, when it was time for Danny to go to bed, he held out his hand and said, "Can we shake, Dad, if you concentrate?" To Elliot's surprise, concentrating on the handshake was all he needed to make it work. "Well," he jokingly told Danny, "let it be a lesson to you. Handshaking is a lot easier than kissing." Diane was about ready to turn in. It was past 11 on the living room clock. "Are you going to bed soon?" she asked her father. "No, I'm beginning to think ghosts don't get tired. So you're going to sit up all night? I guess that's my job. I'm a ghost." Iterating. Ghost. It's very brilliant. It'd be a travesty if a reader were to forget that they were reading books. It would be quite responsible of find us. That reminds me, Diane said. Do you really think you can go to work like this? Who are you trying to kid? Hey, I'm not saying it'll be some kind of a breeze, but it can be done. Diane watched him concentrate on a bottle sitting on the bar. If I concentrate hard enough, he said, fixed on the bottle, and we all stick to the plan, we can keep people from knowing I'm a ghost. We don't, Diane said, watching her father pour a drink for himself. What happens to us? We don't have life insurance. You don't own this house. It's all true, Elliot said sadly. How am I supposed to support myself and a brother and a sister? Diane, somehow I'm going to pull this off. I'll give you my word. I'm not going to let you kids down. Elliot raised the glass in a toast. When did you start drinking? Diane asked. Thought that stuff was for special occasions. Right, Elliot agreed, gesturing with the glass. Here's to Thursday. After bringing a glass to his lips and drinking, Elliot realized he hadn't tasted a thing. He looked down and noticed a large puddle forming on the floor. The drink just went right through you, Diane said sadly. I'll see you in the morning. I need to sleep and forget what just happened. Elliot flickered a few minutes after Diane departed. By his guess, the flickering didn't last more than a second or two, but it worried him. Had the Englishman been right? Was he going to flicker out before Thursday? Suspense. Chapter 13. About halfway through, by the way. 3 hours long total, short of some travesty happening, requiring me to prolong reading. Elliot awakened everybody early the next morning. He wanted to get an early start on the trip to the office, and he wanted the kids to have one last look at him before daylight hit and wiped him out. Breakfast, Diane reported on denting the car fender and having it repaired. Elliot tried, but he couldn't get interested in the story, though he knew he should. Finally, he said, if I get a new company car on Thursday, I'll leave it to you. Are you going away? Amanda asked immediately. Her only dialogue is that way. Really quite, it establishes a character, repetition and whatnot. It's really quite a brilliant decision. You can't leave a new company car to somebody else, Danny said firmly, before adding, can you? Let's worry about those things later, Elliot remarked. For now, you can worry about finishing breakfast and gathering up all of our equipment. I think I'm about to disappear. Amanda was ready first, so Elliot decided to go to the car with her. We'll be in the car, he called to Diane and Danny. Now, Amanda, you take my hand, because as soon as I open the door, you won't be able to see it. Can I hold it? Amanda said hesitantly, fearful that her hand would go right through his. Yes, I want you to hold my hand so I can practice concentrating. Ghost should. Elliot vanished in the daylight, and Amanda kept a tight grip around his invisible hand. She liked holding her daddy's hand. Unfortunately, Stuart Williams happened to be riding by the Hopper house at that moment, and when he glanced at it, hoping to see his friend Danny, he almost fell off his bike. Amanda seemed to be going somewhere, but she had one hand in the air. Stuart braked to a stop, wondering if Danny had switched from magic to hypnotism. Watching carefully, Stuart saw Amanda pass an overturned bike, and then she stopped to look at it. The bike was raising into an upright position by itself. Or was it just being moved by a ghost? Stuart rejected the thought almost as quickly as it entered his mind. He didn't believe in ghosts, especially in his own neighborhood. Location ended. Get in, Elliot told Amanda, opening the car door for her and also getting in. Stuart's eyes almost popped. The car door had opened and closed by itself. The bike had stood up by itself. The Hoppers were going from weird to super weird. He fought off his instinct to call Danny, who was getting into the car with Diane. Instead, he decided to watch. You're sitting on me, Elliot said. Danny jumped up. Sorry, he said. I'll get in the back. Once Danny was seated, Diane started the engine and took off. I still don't think this is going to work, she announced. Still dazed by the unexplainable things he'd observed, Stuart attempted to follow the car, but in his haste he ran into a hedge. By the time he was ready to roll again, his car was gone. Diane drove fast, and Elliot didn't complain about her speed. Flying is really scary, he told Danny. I'd like to be able to do it, Danny said. That's just what we need, Diane said sarcastically. 2 ghosts dropping in every now and then. After parking, they rode the elevator to Elliot's office. It was early, but Carol was there, working away. Hi, kids, she said as Danny and Amanda and her invisible boss went past her. Where's your dad? Collins and the others were going crazy looking for him. Maybe he's dead, Diane mumbled. Tired, Danny quickly added. Dead tired. Carol followed them into Elliot's office. Well, what do you think of your dad's new surroundings? Pretty fancy, huh? The kids didn't answer. They were busy closing the drapes and turning off all the lights. Where are you going? Carol finally asked. Carol, Danny said as Elliot waved faint outline of his hand in her face. Do you see my father anywhere? No, and don't change the subject. Danny glanced around and spotted one last light. He turned it off and Elliot immediately came into view. Oh no, Carol screamed. Hi, Elliot meekly. Scared the lunch out of me, Elliot. Don't ever do that again. Sorry, Elliot replied. I have no way of knowing you had lunch already. Where have you been? Collins is absolutely furious. It's a long story. Thought it might be. Elliot looked around. Okay, kids, he said. I think it works fine. Let's lock it in. Diane handed masking tape to Danny and Amanda. They quickly taped all the drapes and shut and unscrewed all the light bulbs. In total disbelief, Carol looked from Elliot to the kids and back again. Okay, Carol, Elliot told her. We have a lot to get done. Okay, Elliot, but first tell me what they're doing. I just thought it would be nicer in here without all that lousy sunshine. What? Carol remarked. I thought you loved sunshine. Oh yeah, actually it's the view. It's not pretty and it's very distracting. You told me last week you loved the view. It's really my eyes, Elliot said, obviously struggling. I've suddenly become very sensitive to light. Well, why didn't you say so? Carol replied. I can buy that. Okay, we'll stick with that. Diane, you pick me up later. You all did good work. Excellent, as a matter of fact. St. Peter calls for you, Diane joked. We'll get the number. Thanks a lot, Elliot said as the three of them trooped out of the office. Carol slid a schedule towards Elliot. Here's what we are looking at, she said. Cancel the 10, cancel the 10:30, ditto the 12, the 2, the 5, and both 5:30s. Can't cancel the 5. What about 4? You don't have 4. Move the 5 to 4 and cancel the 4. Carol wasn't sure she had heard him correctly, but she got busy writing down all she could remember. At the same time, Elliot started floating out of the office. Elliot knew that feeling. He had just felt it before his trip to England. No! He called out, concentrating hard on sticking around. Don't cancel the 4, Carol asked without looking up. Yes, Elliot said. Cancel the 4. What about the 6? Carol said as Elliot struggled with the force, pulling him towards the window. Cancel it! The force wouldn't stop. It stretched Elliot out of shape. Not now! He screamed in protest. What do you mean? Carol asked. Do you want to cancel it or not? Elliot managed to pull back into recognizable form just before Carol shot to look his way. You can cancel it later at your convenience, he explained. Are you okay? Carol asked, wondering why Elliot seemed to be making jerky movements with his body. I'm fine, Elliot replied, continuing to struggle with the force. I don't understand why you even asked. Well, do you want some coffee? No, thanks. Stuff just seems to run right through me. Carol couldn't take any more. Elliot was working too hard, much too hard. She put down her notebook and pulled off her glasses. Elliot, she said, looking at him with deep concern. Forgive me. I'm worried about you. You shouldn't worry. I'm all... Listen, Carol interrupted as she turned her back to him. This is hard for me to say. Just hear me out. Force wanted Elliot, and it felt like no amount of concentration would stop it. Elliot clenched his teeth and tried anyway. When you work with someone as closely as I have with you, Carol continued, you've come to have certain feelings for that person. You... The force lifted Elliot out of the room. He didn't have time to say goodbye or even apologize for another disappearance. As he passed over Carol's head, he realized she was still babbling on. Oh well, he thought. If I have to go, probably a good time. Chapter 14. Instead of fighting the force, Elliot relaxed and tried to enjoy the flight. He soon realized he was going too fast to enjoy anything, so he closed his eyes and thought about more things he should have done when he was alive. Elliot's thoughts about being alive ended when the force guided him into a landing in a small dark room. Listening to the humming sound all around him, Elliot puzzled over where he might be, but nothing came to mind. Finally he said, Hello, is anyone home? Almost like magic, a door swung open and Sir Edith entered the small room, just about sandwiched alongside Elliot. Before Elliot could speak, Sir Edith turned to a latch in the door, and a light went on inside the room, which seemed like an airplane laboratory. Hello, hello, Sir Edith said good-spiritedly. How are we today? Where are we today might be a better question, Elliot remarked irritatedly. We're on British Airways, somewhere over the Atlantic. I understand. I was napping before your arrival. You can go right back to napping after you get me out of here, Elliot said. I have work to do. My dear chap, you're dead, so relax and enjoy it. No one expects you to go to work. By the way, I can't see hide nor hair of you in this light. I'm right here. Sir Edith turned off and unlatched the door, triggering a mechanism that shut off the lavatory light. "Ah, that's much better," he said, facing Elliot in the darkness. "Read my lips," Elliot said, trying to recall where he had heard that ridiculous expression. "I have to go back to my office right now. My secretary is talking to me and she could run out of words." Seemingly oblivious to Elliot's request, Sir Edith started measuring Elliot once again. "I don't think you appreciate how important this is," he said. "What's happening with you isn't happening over 40 years. Elliot didn't respond. He didn't appreciate any part of what was going on. Neither did the nun, who opened the lavatory door and saw two men, one appearing to be holding the other by the shoulders. "But excuse me," she said, quickly closing the door. Sir Edith shrugged and continued his work. "Your readings aren't very good," he said with concern. "I flickered last night," Elliot confessed. "What does it mean?" "It means you should be getting your affairs in order quickly," Elliot gulped. "How much time do I have left?" he asked. "A day," Sir Edith speculated, "or 36 hours tops." "That doesn't get me to Thursday." "You might not even get to Wednesday," Sir Edith replied, "if you start playing Ghost and run yourself down." "Playing Ghost? What do you mean?" Sir Edith wiggled his fingers and fluttered his cheeks. "Ooga ooga booga," he said in a ghost-like imitation. "Jumping out of walls, flying around, scaring people. Loads of fun, I admit, but very draining." "Flying around," Elliot thought, "hasn't been my idea." "Send me back," he said. "I don't have a minute to spare, so send me back right now. You have to." "All right," Sir Edith said reluctantly. "I should be on the coast sometime tomorrow. I'll see you then, what?" "That'll be great. Just don't whisk me away anymore. I can't take it. So use the phone, make an appointment. Ring my bell. Stop over for a spot of tea, what?" "You're a mite touchy, old chap, but very well. Be off now." Sir Edith pressed the button on his case, and Elliot rocketed off. The Englishman smiled at the sight, thinking the touchy American would be back where he started before he knew it. A second later, he threw open the lavatory and came face to face with the nun, who was cautiously awaiting her turn. Instead of rushing to the lavatory, she waited for the other man she had seen to step out. He didn't. She could see that the room was empty. "Careful with that flush mechanism," Sir Elliot warned. "It's incredibly powerful." Sir Edith promptly headed down the aisle. By the time he reached the seat, Elliot was tumbling through the window of his office and landing on the floor. To his amazement and delight, Carol was still looking away and talking. He struggled to get to his feet. "These passions burn deep with us," Carol said, "but we must never speak of their name. Never! Do you understand what I'm telling you?" With that question, Carol whirled towards Elliot. "Yes," he agreed, though totally bewildered by her speech. "It's terrific. I'm with you all the way on this one. It's fantastic, or as Danny would say, outstanding." Carol choked with emotion. She immediately bit her lip and rushed from the office, fighting back tears of joy. Still bewildered, Elliot promptly hid the intercom and said, "Let's get started setting up some conference calls." "Oh," Carol's voice said, "I forgot to tell you that you have taken your life insurance physical this afternoon." The idea shocked Elliot and undoubtedly would have sent a chill up his spine if he still had one. "What?" he screamed at the intercom. "Can't they just give me the insurance without the physical?" "No! And they said it's this afternoon or never. I have the forms right here." Elliot didn't want to believe her response. He paced back and forth, formulating a plan. However, Carol wasn't waiting. She gathered up the forms, picked up her coffee, and went back to see Elliot. "You've got to get them to waive the exam," Elliot was saying into the intercom. "Call them right now and think of something. Also, make sure your paperwork for my pension plan is pushed through, will you?" Carol gasped. Elliot was in the middle of the desk. His legs were gone. His upper body seemed to be resting on the center of his desk. Her jaw dropped open in his steady grip on the coffee cup. "And one more thing," Elliot said, just as he realized Carol's gasp hadn't come over the intercom. Turning and seeing the look on her face, he promptly realized where he was standing and simultaneously rejected the notion of jumping out of the desk. He didn't want to exhaust himself playing Ghost. Instead, he stood his ground and picked up his own coffee cup. "I think someone has been slipping some mind-bending stuff into this coffee," he remarked casually. "Have you noticed that?" "Oh, no," Carol said, taking the suggestion faster than she could spell relief. "Here are the forms. I think I'm going to be sick." Elliot reluctantly took the forms, and Carol rushed out of the office. Standing there with the paperwork in hand, he shot a glance at the wall mirror. His reflection wasn't in it, but the paperwork was. "I probably don't have a shadow either," he thought. And then a brilliant idea hit him. After checking the time, Elliot picked up the phone and tapped his home number. "Diane," he said, "I'm glad I caught you at home. Now go to my hall closet and get the following things and bring them to me right away." Elliot outlined his needs. When he was finished, Diane said, "I'll be missing school. You'll be missing me if you don't hurry," Elliot warned before putting down the receiver. This whole, like I said, a tale of redemption. Understandable. Chapter 15. Elliot's warning worried Diane. In fact, the entire matter worried her. As she gathered the items he wanted, she wished she could tell Janelle about Elliot, but she had promised to keep the ghost business secret. Besides, she decided, Janelle wouldn't believe it. No one in school would believe her father was a ghost, except perhaps the school's psychologist. Rumor had it he would believe anything. During the drive to Elliot's office, Diane decided she needed to be calm. Amanda was on the verge of becoming very upset about the situation, and Danny was also probably quite disturbed once he got over the idea of having the best magic trick in the world for a father. So instead of worrying, Diane concentrated on the kind of excuse she was going to make for missing her calculus class. Diane stopped in front of Elliot's office building. A second or so later, the passenger door opened and some papers floated around the car. Then the door slammed shut as several pedestrians walked in bewilderment. "Haven't they seen medical papers before?" Elliot said as he placed the papers on the seat. "Let's get out of here." "Where to?" Diane asked as she pulled away from the curb. After giving her the address of the medical building, Elliot fixed his attention on all the items in the back seat. "Good work," he told Diane. "I guess it is. What's your plan to do with these clothes? Are you going to plan a quick trip to Alaska? I need to be seen in the daylight. These clothes I have on are ghost clothes. They become invisible when I did. Does that make any sense to you?" "Sure, but why do you want clothes good for Chicago in January? Most people are still wearing summer clothes. Baseball season isn't even over yet." "I need to cover every bit of me," Elliot explained as he started to dress. "Short-sleeved shirt with no arms and neck and head sticking out of it creates a suspicion." "Right, but an eccentric man who finds this weather cold is a different story. They'll think I'm from Arizona." Diane understood this idea. She had seen the return of the Invisible Man on TV one night. "They might," Diane said, eyeing the body coming together on the seat alongside her. "What are the other things for?" Elliot quickly explained he needed them because he had to take a complete physical. Diane laughed as she thought about how he planned to use the items. "I'm sorry," she said, continuing to laugh, "but you're becoming a crazy ghost. You really are." "Trust me," Elliot said with assurance. Diane parked near the entrance, trying to keep a straight face. She watched as Elliot pulled off his galoshes and adjusted the woolen scarf covering his face. "How do I look?" he asked. "I don't know which I like more," Diane said jokingly, "your hat or your gloves." "Trust me," Elliot said, opening the car door. "I'll be back here in 2 hours." "Okay, but I'm going to miss another class." "Can't be helped," Elliot said, slamming the door, setting out for the entrance. For a moment, Diane watched. People in summer clothes were sneaking glances at the man with the heavy overcoat. They don't think he's from Arizona, she thought. They just think he's crazy. Still, she concluded as she pulled away, crazy people need physicals too. Glances from people quickly became outright stares, and Elliot just as quickly decided to deal with them directly. "Brr," he announced, rubbing his arms and glancing around. "Sure is cold here. How do you stand it?" Caught staring, people slunk off without a word. Elliot shrugged and stepped into the building. So far, he thought, so good. Doctors and nurses seemed to be racing around in Oak Tree Medical Corporation. "Are you Elliot Harper?" a female voice asked Elliot as he entered the office. Elliot saw it was a nurse detecting the question into a nervous-looking middle-aged man. "No, I'm Rob Cohen," the man replied, and his eyes widened in fear as he heard the crunching of galoshes. "Well, good that it's warmer in here. Say, I'm Elliot Harper." Routinely, the nurse handed Elliot a clipboard with a form on it and said, "Okay, Mr. Harper, you just need to take this to room 2 and get stripped down to the waist." Elliot took the clipboard and hurried down the hallway. As soon as he was in room 2, he closed the door and went to work, pulling off his clothing, turning down the lights, and preparing his other equipment. Got ready, he heard a knock on the door. "Come in," he called. The doctor stepped into the room and picked up the clipboard Elliot had given. Like the nurse at the front door, he seemed oblivious of Elliot. After a few seconds, he remarked, "Why is it so dark in here?" "Please," Elliot begged, "I'm very shy." The doctor shrugged and adjusted his stethoscope, and then he placed it against Elliot's chest. Smiling confidently, Elliot stood there with his hands behind his back. In a matter of seconds, the doctor's expression went from pleasure to disbelief. "Something wrong?" Elliot finally asked. "Your heart has stopped," the doctor said incredulously. "Must be something wrong with your stethoscope," Elliot said, starting to fumble with something behind his back. While the doctor checked his stethoscope, Elliot surreptitiously... Oh, damn. Royce. Come down with a bit of a fire all of a sudden. I Used to working incredibly short days down at the conglomerate. It's quite strange. Be up for more than 2 or 3 hours. I need my beauty sleep after all. I need to keep up appearances. Hosting. While the doctor checked his stethoscope, Elliot surreptitiously rewound the tape of a clock ticking in Danny's portable player, which he had behind his back. Try it again, Elliot said. This time the doctor listened for about a minute. It must have been the stethoscope, he told Elliot. Your heart runs like a watch. Go across the hall now and see Nurse Sattler in X-ray. Without another word, the doctor handed the clipboard to Elliot and went on his way. Elliot paused and gave a sigh of relief before pushing down the next big hurdle, X-rays. A confident Elliot emerged from the examination room. Down the hall, a shaky Rob Cohen emerged from another examination room. Elliot waved to Cohen before he pushed the door to the X-ray room and stepped inside. Cohen's eyes bulged as he struggled to maintain his balance. He'd just seen the clipboard cross the hall, and the clipboard had seemed to wave at him. You're taking this physical too seriously, he told himself, and tried to catch his breath. To Elliot's satisfaction, the room was dark. To his dissatisfaction, Nurse Sattler was waiting. As soon as she took the clipboard from him, she said, Stand behind the machine and place your chest against the plate, please. Elliot looked at the nurse. She was behind a protective lead wall, giving all her attention to the X-ray monitor. Then Elliot looked around the room, praying it would have what he needed. The picture on the monitor surprised Nurse Sattler. Mr. Hopper, she said angrily, you must place your chest against the plate. A few seconds later, an X-ray image appeared on the nurse's screen. Hands on hips, she called. Elliot struggled with the human skeleton he had placed in front of the machine. Getting his hands on its hips wasn't easy. The last thing Elliot wanted to do was fall apart on camera. That would be hard to explain and would definitely raise his insurance premiums. Next image on Nurse Sattler's screen puzzled her. Finally, she remarked, Did anyone ever tell you got the bone structure of a woman? Just my luck, Elliot mumbled in response. Breathe in and hold, the nurse said, just before taking the X-ray. Is that right? Elliot asked. That's right, Mr. Hopper. Send the next patient and go get dressed. Elliot smiled to himself and moved the skeleton to one side. Then he stepped to the door and opened it. You're next, Mr. Cohen, she said. Forgetting about the light pouring into the room, Elliot turned and pushed the skeleton into a corner he had occupied. Thank you, Mr. Cohen started to say until he realized he was the only thing in the room with a skeleton. A moving one. He gasped for air just as Elliot realized what was wrong. See you later, Elliot said as he slipped past the petrified Mr. Cohen. Elliot began dressing as soon as he was back in the room in which he had started. He couldn't wait to see Diane and tell her how he had breezed through the physical. His smart aleck daughter had doubted him. Almost sneered when he'd asked to trust him. Well, she had a big surprise coming to her. Elliot had a big surprise coming to him, too. A nurse stuck her head in the door and said, Oh, Mr. Hopper, I'm glad I caught you. One last thing we need from you. He handed Elliot a capped plastic bottle. Elliot recognized it immediately. A sick expression spread across his face. I don't know, he started to say. The bathroom's down the hall, she said, interrupting. The water fountain right outside the door. Water, he said with a gulp. Just seems to run right through me. Good, the nurse said. Won't have any trouble. He was gone before Elliot could voice another objection. He stared at the plastic bottle. Maybe, he thought, Miss Smart Aleck was right after all. Chapter 16. Diane was leaving school when she ran into Ralph Curcio. I guess your dad didn't notice the fender, he said. What makes you say that? I saw you driving a car this morning, so I knew you weren't grounded. I'm not grounded, but I did tell him about the fender, Diane said. He didn't think it looked bad, thanks to you. By the way, I didn't see you this morning. No, Ralph said. I didn't think you did. I was in front of you over on Stockbridge Avenue. I spotted you in the mirror. Oh yeah, I was talking to my dad. God damn it, man. Falling apart. Just all of these emotions flooding my brain like a deluge of feelings. It's difficult to keep my composure. I sincerely apologize. I'm just going to start the chapter over. Diane was leaving school when she ran into Ralph Curcio. I guess your dad didn't notice the fender, he said. What makes you say that? I saw you driving your car this morning, so I knew you weren't grounded. I'm not grounded, but I did tell him about the fender, Diane said. He didn't think it looked that bad, thanks to you. By the way, I didn't see you this morning. No, Ralph said. I didn't think you did. I was in front of you over on Stockbridge Avenue. I spotted you in my mirror. Oh yeah, I was taking my dad to work. I had my brother and sister with me. I see them, but where was your dad? Sitting next to me, Diane said, and caught herself. I mean, he was sitting next to me after I picked him up. You saw me. I was going to the house where I was supposed to pick him up. Oh, I see what you mean, Ralph said, obviously bewildered. Now I have to pick him up again. Diane said. Want to ride along with me? Are you crazy? Diane blurted out, thinking how embarrassed she would be if he saw Elliot in his Antarctic tourist outfit. I'm sorry, Ralph mumbled, hurt by the sharp rejection. I'll see you around. Wait a minute, Diane pleaded, moving after. My love, have you ride along with me someday? Not when I have to pick up my father. A little weird lately. Well, I'm the one who's sorry now. Feeling better, Ralph smiled at her and said, That's the name of an old song Connie Francis used to sing long ago. I learned it from my mom. Tell me about it, Diane said, glancing at her watch. I have a little time left. Meanwhile, Elliot was thinking about the time too. As the nurse had directed, he had walked over to the bathroom, but he was stuck there. The plastic cup was empty, and though he thought about filling it with water, he had entered... And though the thought of filling it with water had entered his mind, he didn't think he could get by with water. It would be stretching his luck. The time Mr. Cohen walked in the bathroom with his plastic bottle, Elliot was beginning to believe he was going to fail his physical. How are you doing? Elliot said. Cohen didn't reply. He seemed frightened to death by the sight of Elliot. But he was determined to complete his physical. Elliot listened with envy, half wondering if he could prevail upon the man to fill his bottle too. And it hit Elliot. Way to pass his physical. As soon as Cohen tightened up the top of his bottle and started for the door, Elliot blocked his way. I lose my head when I have to do things like this, Elliot said. Step aside, please, Cohen responded. Look, Elliot said, bending forwards and pulling off his hat. Cohen choked and turned pale. The man's head was gone. Looked as if his body was gone, too. Let me out, he screamed, dropping the plastic bottle and running around Elliot. Thank you very much, Elliot said, scooping up the bottle, and the bathroom door slammed shut. I just hope your kidneys are good. Heading back to the examination room, Elliot heard a nurse say, There goes Mr. Hooper. See, there's nothing wrong with him, Mr. Cohen. You're just a little stressed out from your physical. Now go ahead and do your tinkle and you're finished. Yes, do it again. Elliot almost jumped into the dark room. He quickly removed his hat, coat, and gloves. Maybe some nurse was going to check on Mr. Cohen's claim. Elliot felt slightly sorry for the man, but nothing was going to stand in the way of his passing the physical. Hopefully. As Elliot had guessed, the nurse did appear seconds later. He was collecting a specimen, she said, smiling broadly. I'm glad to say you haven't lost your head yet. Did you see Mr. Cohen in the bathroom? Yes, he's a strange man, Elliot. You're a little strange yourself, the nurse replied, looking at Elliot's clothing. At least you haven't gone off the deep end. Take care of yourself. No problem, Elliot replied. 3 minutes after the nurse departed, Elliot shot out of the room. Filled with pride at his success, he literally danced out of the medical offices into the hall. In his excitement, his scarf slipped aside and his hat appeared to be floating in space. He turned a corner and came face to face with Mr. Cohen. As soon as he saw the wide-eyed terror on Mr. Cohen's face, Elliot reached for his scarf, but it was too late. The frightened man screamed and ran off down the hall. I'm sorry, Elliot whispered, hoping Diane would not be on time. Unfortunately, Elliot was early. The physical hadn't taken as long as he had estimated, so he had 15 minutes to waste. He amused himself by playing a little game he named It's Not Nice to Stare. Turning on the first guy he caught staring, Elliot said, Do I have the right time? Then, as the starer watched, Elliot thrust his wrist out of his jacket sleeve and revealed his watch. The starer checked the time on Elliot's watch until he realized his watch was floating in space. He ran off. The next victim was gaping at Elliot for a long time before Elliot reached down and took off his shoe, taking an imaginary pebble from it. Realizing that Elliot didn't seem to have a foot, the gaper quickly went on his way. Elliot was just about to throw open his overcoat for a female starer when Diane pulled the curve. You just saved a woman from fainting, Elliot said cheerfully as he got in the car. Don't even bother to explain, Diane replied. Just tell me about your physical. I passed. How? While Elliot related the details of his physical, he also removed the clothes he had been wearing. In truth, he'd always liked the clothes he'd died in, and having them as ghost clothes amused him. Diane wasn't amused with either his ghost clothes or any of the things that had happened during his physical. Now you're invisible until dark, she complained. That bothers me. It doesn't amuse me. What are you worried about? I'm doing great! Yeah, and what if someone finds out you've died and you're a ghost? I mean, suppose they find your body. Are you kidding me? I'm at the bottom of the river. I don't mean the L.A. River. Brilliant exception. Asks a question that the reader does not ask. Reasoning is obvious. It makes you think. Do you know how weird I would look if any kids from school found out about you? They'd probably start calling me Casper's daughter. Diane stopped for a light and Elliot glanced at her. For his part, she seemed a little dramatic, but the look on her face indicated real concern. He was about to respond with a male voice called, "Yo, Diane, let me in, will you? I need a ride." Diane and Elliot looked at the teenage guy standing by the passenger side of the car. Diane, the guy looked like he should be giving concerts. To Elliot, he looked like the top nominee for Malek's Moment of the Year award. "What is it?" Elliot asked. "Daddy, it's Tony Ricker. Do not embarrass me." "No, but you're not going to let him in here." Actually, Diane had no choice, and neither did Elliot. Tony Ricker hopped in, squeezing alongside Elliot without seeing him. "Hey, thanks, babe," he told Diane. "You're looking sweet." "Yeah, thanks, man," Diane replied. "You too." "I know I am," Tony said with all the modesty he could muster. Light changed as Diane rolled off, while Elliot rolled his eyes and wondered if he was going to be able to keep his word. Diane seemed enthralled by every word spilling out of the young monster's mouth. She also seemed intent on pretending Elliot wasn't there. "I seen your friend Jonelle at the mall, you know," Tony went on. "Told her how much I dig you, and she goes, you know, like, how I should keep dreaming. I couldn't tell if she was putting me down, putting me on, or putting me aside. I told her I'd give you something to dream about. Are you dreaming it?" "Oh, Tony," Diane whispered. "I didn't even know you liked me." "No, Diane, no," Elliot told himself. "Your imagination. Ghosts can't gag." Frightened by the news, Tony said, "Let's not get carried away here. I'm just saying, you turned me on, so I must turn you on. Maybe we should lock lips for a day or two." This, Elliot thought, worse than drowning. "Cool your jets, pal," Diane said calmly, "or you're off the case." Once Elliot realized she wasn't talking to him, he was pleased with her response, but Tony wasn't ready to quit. He wiggled his tongue and made some loud kissing sounds. Didn't know it, but he was only inches from Elliot's face. Elliot knew it. "Oh," Diane said, "I'm going to have to cool my own jets." With that inspiration, Tony moved closer to Diane and much closer to Elliot. "I can't take this guy," Elliot thought. He searched Diane's purse for something to get Tony to back off. Finally, he found the perfect item, a sharp nail file. Taking his hold off the file, Elliot prepared to jab Tony with it. Tony noticed the file moving through space, and at the same time Diane saw it. Froze. Diane grabbed the file away from Elliot and put it in her purse. "New lightweight materials are amazing," Diane remarked. "Things just seem to float out of my pocketbook." "Oh yeah," Tony said, anxious to show he knew everything. "I had one just like it." They rode for a while. "Get him out of there," Elliot whispered. "No way," Diane replied, "and be quiet." "Of course not. I'm thinking about the lightweight materials. Those pants are made of them, so don't be surprised if they just float off me." Tony didn't even get the opportunity to touch his belt. Elliot screamed in his ear, and Tony leapt back in fear. Elliot went right after him, beating him on the head and shoulders, while Diane struggled to stop her and raged farther. Determined to be rid of Tony, Elliot reached over to him and opened the car door. Next, he dumped Tony onto the pavement. From there, Tony watched as the car drove off, tried to understand how Diane had opened the door and kicked him out. It hadn't seemed as if she was close enough. If he ever rode with her again, he thought he definitely had to buckle up. Back in the car, Elliot was shaking with rage. Diane was shaking with rage. Elliot had ruined things with Tony Ricker. "I can't believe you did this!" she roared. Still furious about Tony's words and deeds, Elliot shuddered to think about what was going to happen to Diane when he was no longer around. "You are never, ever, ever going out with that slime bag," he announced. Diane pouted. "Tony Ricker just happens to be one of the few guys who ever noticed me," she said. "I'll see him if I want to. Any time I want to. You'll see him over my dead body." "It looks that way," Diane screamed, just before she skidded to a stop. Chapter 17. The screeching brakes caught Stuart and Danny's attention. They were in front of the Hooper house, and Stuart immediately said, "Your sister ought to learn how to stop a car." "You ought to teach her," Danny said sarcastically. "Oh, I forgot you rode into a bush the other day. Sorry." Stuart wasn't listening. Diane had climbed out of the car, and it seemed as if she were going to cry. "Now decided to play daddy," she said. "If you can't do it for Danny and Amanda, at this point I can handle myself. But thank you very much all the same. I'd like to be able to pursue my pathetic social life without interference." Diane paused momentarily before going on and continuing her conversation with nobody, as far as Stuart could tell. When she stomped into the house, Stuart looked down towards Danny for some sort of explanation. Diane's having a nervous breakdown, Danny said, trying hard to sound convincing. Is that a good reason for acting crazy? Stuart asked. Well, Danny. Puzzled over Stuart's question, Elliot pulled over Diane's tears. He followed her into the kitchen. There was dark enough for Elliot to come into view. And as soon as he did, he said, Are you through crying, Diane? Diane's crying was over, and her anger hadn't subsided. Go away, she said, and turned on the light to get him out of sight. Oh, that's kind of you, Elliot grumbled almost to himself. Trying to reason with the living is just about impossible. No, Diane protested. It's dead people who can be jerks whenever they want. Elliot held his tongue. He felt as if he were going to flicker, and that reminded him of Sir Edith's warning about saving energy. While he watched, Diane checked the answering machine and found there was a message. I hope this is Tony, she said tauntingly. If Tony Ricker shows up around here, Elliot said, disregarding his need to conserve energy, I'll hunt him to death. Hopper! Blasted an angry voice from the answering machine. I don't know where you've been, and I know you... but I know where you're going if I don't hear from you. Immediately! The thump of the receiver being slammed down ended the message. Elliot groaned. Mr. Collins' voice was all too familiar to him, but the prospect of him keeping at bay until Thursday was beginning to appear remote. Elliot's thoughts about Collins were interrupted by Diane slamming drawers in the pantry when she considered she might cook for dinner. With all the work I do around here, she said, moaning, anyone would think I would choose my own friends. But that's not the case, not here. Diane, Amanda said, strolling into the kitchen. Who are you talking to? Who else? Our very own Casper. Smiling enthusiastically. Amanda turned off the light and said, Hi, Daddy. Hi, sweetie. So happy to see Amanda. Elliot's mind was elsewhere. We'll get to your problems later, he told Diane as he picked up the phone. Right now I have to deal with my office. Diane wasn't interested. All I get is grief around here, she said. I can clean up, I do the laundry, I do everything. I take out the garbage, Amanda corrected. Diane's mind was elsewhere too. She rambled on while Amanda struggled with the garbage pail, which was too big and heavy for her. Elliot put down the phone. I cook meals, Diane said, and what do I get for it? Nothing but complaints! I don't complain about your cooking, Elliot replied. Oh, tell me another story. Amanda, Elliot. You're going... hurt yourself. Elliot lifted the pail and started carrying it out. Amanda reached up and touched the bottom of the pail. Determined to help. For her part, Diane decided the discussion wasn't over, and following Elliot to the door. I'll tell you about last Saturday morning, she said. I'll leave the words. Diane, how can you mess up cornflakes? That jog your memory? Continuing on his way to the garbage, Elliot walked by the side of the house, not too far from the spot where Danny and Stuart were sitting. There's nothing from my memory, Elliot called back. His words caught Stuart's attention, but all he could see was Amanda carrying the gigantic garbage pail with one hand. Where's your father? Stuart asked. I just heard him. Father, Danny said, feigning surprise. I guess he's at work. Diane, Elliot called. Let's face it, this isn't about food. Hear that, Danny? Danny gave Stuart a wide stare. Are you feeling all right? He asked. About being ticked off that I don't want you going out with some real creep, Elliot continued. Stuart stared at Danny, who was concentrating on keeping a straight face. Something weird was going on at the Hopper's house. Stuart was sure of that, and he was equally sure Danny wasn't about to give him a hint. Maybe I do feel a little peculiar, he said. I'm going home. Yeah, you should, Danny said. It could be mumps. Hurt your ears. Well, Danny struggled to get rid of Stuart. Diane struggled to get Elliot off her back. I'm not your responsibility anymore, she told him as soon as he re-entered the kitchen. So why do you care what I do? Why do I care? I'm surprised you have to ask a question like that. Doorbell interrupted Elliot. Amanda, honey, he said. Please see who that is and get rid of them. Okay, Daddy, she replied and rushed off. Now, lady, let me answer your question. I'm your father. I love you. Frowning, Diane said. You don't love me. What are you talking about? Of course I love you. I'm my daughter. Right, I know. And what you feel for me is what fathers feel for daughters. It's not really love, it's father stuff. Daddy, Amanda said, interrupting. It's Joan. Joan, Elliot said, realizing he had forgotten about her. You want to hot tub with her? Oh no, really, no, she can't see me anymore, remember? Oh yeah, Amanda said, starting for the front door. Look, Diane went on, you only love me because I'm your daughter. You don't love me for who I am. I could have turned out to be anybody. You feel the same way about me. You didn't even know it was going to be me. Right, love for you. No, it's not. Romeo and Juliet is love. You took poison for her. What have you ever done for me? I ate the cornflakes, didn't I? Mouthing an incoherent response, Diane promptly walked out of the room. Diane, Elliot anxiously called after her. Chapter 18. Wasn't that your father's voice? Joan asked. Yes, Amanda admitted, but he says he can't see him anymore. If Elliot had heard Joan or Amanda, he might have altered his course, but every thought was on Diane. He followed her to her room and slammed the door in his face. Instead of walking through it, Elliot knocked. Diane, he pleaded. Come out here. Talk to me. In response, Diane turned up her stereo. Elliot fought the impulse to step through her door and shut off her stereo. He knocked again and called, Diane, please stop this. Diane raised the volume on her stereo, and Elliot decided to give up. He turned and saw Amanda coming his way. Daddy, she said, I have a message from Joan. What is it? Joan says you should try dropping dead. Thanks, Amanda. Say. You didn't say I was already dead, did you? No. Dad, Danny said, moving down the hallway. I need to talk with you. How am I going to be a career magician in school tomorrow without the Trunk of Doom trick? Let me just deal with this Joan thing first, okay? Sure, but the sound of the doorbell cut off Danny's response. That's probably Joan now, Elliot surmised. She can't see me in this light, Danny. You go on and let her go over to the den. It's nice and dark, and they're probably able to go in and talk to her. Okay, Danny said, clearly disappointed with his father. We'll talk after that, I promise, Elliot said soothingly. Danny went downstairs, and without telling him, Elliot tagged along. He wanted to get a sense of Joan's mood. What he got was a sense of Mr. Collins' mood. He and Mr. Seymour and 4 other company executives glared at Danny. Hello there, little boy, Mr. Collins said. Is your daddy home? Elliot knew if he was still alive, he would want to die. He was standing right in front of Mr. Collins and the others, but they couldn't see him. Mr. Collins, he called, trying to sound as if he were in another room. What a nice surprise, I'll be right with you. Collins and the others stepped past Danny. Great acoustics in this house, one man whispered, but I would have sworn Hopper was right here. Collins wasn't interested in acoustics. Hopper, he called. Your secretary told us you were home. Later on, I'll ask you what you're doing home, but right now all these busy people are waiting for you. Let's get moving and close this deal. Elliot stuck out his tongue and made several other faces at Collins to show and his cohorts. Then he threw his voice and called, Danny, please show our guests to the den. Down in a few minutes. Following Danny's direction, Mr. Collins and the others moved into the den with no idea they had passed by a ghost of Elliot Hopper along the way. For Elliot, the time face-making and joking was over. Before Danny went into the darkened den, Elliot moved alongside him and whispered, Stall them for as long as you can. Try, Danny whispered back, but Elliot had already gone off to get his visible disguise. Elliot dressed quickly, wearing the same clothes he had worn for his physical. The sight of Mr. Collins and the others tagged along after him, and he brought Elliot in for an important decision. The boss and the stooges could wait. First he needed to see Joan and do some explaining. Strong wind greeted Elliot when he stepped outside. He looked in all directions, and as far as he could tell, no one was watching, so he stepped off towards Joan's house. No one within view was watching, but one person was watching. It was Stuart. Hadn't been the least by his friend Danny's efforts to cover up the weird doings at the Hopper house. Instead of going home, Stuart had hopped on his bike and raced to Stenton's Pro Sports shop. He had purchased the best binoculars in stock. After home, taking up a position on his porch, a thing appeared at Hopper's doorway. Focusing in, Stuart decided the thing was definitely Mr. Hopper. Quiet, he loaded himself down with heavy winter clothing. Why did he have a scarf covering his face? Unaware of Stuart and unafraid of the wind, Elliot continued on his way. A few seconds later, a sharp gust swelled his overcoat like a wind-filled sail and lifted him off the ground. Elliot didn't know if he was imitating a boat or a kite, but as he flapped his arms and legs in an effort to regain control, he realized he was going fast and in the right direction. Finally, he grabbed a tree and stopped himself. Holding the tree with one hand, Elliot brushed aside his scarf to get a clearer picture of how far he was from the railing leading to Joan's front step. Seconds later, he hurriedly pulled the scarf back into place. Joan had been watching from her window. He thought she might not answer the doorbell, sounded by a headless man. Fortunately, he decided, it wasn't the snoop. Elliot waited for the wind to ease a little, rushed to the railing, and pulled him up to Joan's front door. She answered the bell almost immediately and looked again at what he guessed was Elliot. She guessed was Elliot, rather. Please, he said, I don't have much time, but there's a logical explanation for everything. Well, suppose you start by telling me why you're dressed like that. We come inside. There's too much wind out here. Hey, but don't think I'm going to fall for a lot of wind. Elliot followed her into the living room. Okay, she said, facing him. You can take your mask off now. The sheriff and his posse just rode off. Funny, Elliot replied. And by the way, this room is bright. Bedroom. I'm a little too bright for that. What's going on with you? Begging you. I need to go in there. This is a dark room. I have a sensible explanation too, but I only have a minute. Joan stared long and hard at the overdressed sight before her. All right, she finally announced. The story had better be excellent. Chapter 19. I'm nearing the end, folks. Exciting. Real ride of a story. Go on for so much longer. Elliot wasted no time, whipping off his scarf and gloves as soon as they entered the darkened room. Joan, I'm crazy about you, he said. The times we spent together have been fantastic, and believe me, I never say or do anything to hurt you. Okay, Joan said, wondering whether he was going to point. Okay, he echoed enthusiastically. I can't tell you how glad I feel about clearing that up. For your understanding, I have to leave now. A minute, you can't leave like that. What? Elliot replied, trying to back away as Joan pulled off his overcoat. You need to calm down. You've been overworking. You need to relax. Actually, Elliot confessed, I need to concentrate just to keep myself together. Nonsense, Joan said, attempting to pull him towards her. Elliot strained to keep her hands from going through him, and in an effort to back out of her reach, he fell on the bed and went right through it. Popped up from under the bed, Joan leapt in fear. Wow, Joan, he said, did you kiss me? How did you get... Never going to forget this, Elliot interrupted as he hastily pulled his overcoat and gathered his other clothing. Joan sat down on the bed. It's too dark in here, she said, almost to herself. You begin seeing things when it's too dark. Another word, Joan. Let's try to remember that this is our moment. Joan watched him leave. He did not need a psychiatrist, but she most definitely needed an eye doctor. Hurrying back to the house, Elliot realized the daylight had given way to evening. Danny, he said upon entering the front door. They're still in there, aren't they? Yeah, but I just ran out of magic tricks and something I need to talk to you about. Didn't light up the room? No, Dad, everything is pretty cool in there, but I need to talk to you. Listen, Elliot interrupted. I have to deal with these guys first. Danny nodded sadly. Okay, he said. Elliot tossed off his disguise and quickly gathered some of his paperwork. Then he rushed into the den. Gentlemen, he said after determining the assembled group could see him, I've got all the documents here. I was delayed because I had to go through them, but I know we can resolve this whole thing now. The disbelieving group eyed Elliot with hostility. Recapturing their confidence wasn't going to be easy. Elliot pondered the next move, but his ringing of the phone settled the matter. Excuse me, he said as he lifted the receiver. Following Elliot's greeting, the voice on the other end said, Hello, Mr. Hopper. Stewart calling. Oh, yeah, I'll get Danny to pick up. No. It's you I want to speak with, Stewart said. No, alien. What? I want $50,000 in small, unmarked bills right away. Or I tell the newspapers and TV stations about you. Geraldo will pay a lot for information about an alien. Elliot stood there listening to a dial tone. It had hung up on him. If I still had blood, Elliot thought, it was boiling. Gentlemen, he said, I'll be back in a minute. Papa, Mr. Collins said, just what do you think you're doing? I'm going right back. Enraged, Collins turned to the others, and like trained puppets, they shook their heads in disgust. Had they given Elliot their attention at the moment, they would have seen him leave the room by walking through the door. While Collins grumbled about Elliot's actions, Stuart Williams stared at his phone, wondering if he had made a mistake. Maybe he should have given Mr. Hopper a chance to respond. Well, again. Elliot interrupted Stuart's thoughts with a hard rap on the window. Yo, what's up? Stuart looked up and blinked in amazement. Hopper hadn't climbed to the second floor of the Williams house, but he was there, just outside Stuart's window, floating in space. "Listen to me, you little weasel," he said. "So much as breathe a word of this to any living thing, I'll do things to you that you can't even imagine." Stuart seemed frozen in fear. His lips appeared to move, but no words came out of his mouth. "Don't ever think of threatening me again," Elliot continued. "I don't get frightened. I give frightened." "I didn't mean to threaten you," Stuart whispered. Elliot pulled out a flashlight, and just before shining it on his face, he said, "See how you like this one, Stuart." Elliot's head disappeared, and Stuart screamed. "I didn't mean a thing," he cried out. "Are you going to keep your slimy little trap shut?" "Yes, I'll never tell anyone," Stuart said, sniffing like a baby. "Just please, don't hurt me." "One more thing I need you to know, you whining little creep," Elliot said proudly. "I'm an alien. Ghost." Following that announcement, Elliot flew for home, and Stuart showed his respect for ghosts by passing out. Except for Danny, the den appeared to be empty while Elliot returned. "Where are they?" he said anxiously. "Where did they go?" "They left," Danny said matter-of-factly. "Left? Left is right," Danny replied. "They were tickled. By the way, I have a little problem of my own. Tomorrow is career day at school, and I can't go there to do my old tricks." Elliot felt overwhelmed. "Danny," he said, "we've all got problems. I'd like to help, but I may have lost my job, and when you consider that comes on top of losing my life, you can understand what I'm getting at." Danny wasn't sure he fully understood, but he understood enough. The help Elliot had once promised wasn't coming. Danny was going to deal with career day on his own. Reaching for the phone, Elliot almost jumped out of his figurative skin when it sounded. He angrily picked it up and said, "Hello!" But Diane, a slightly familiar voice, replied, "This is Tony Ricker." Bells rang in what was passing for Elliot's head. He sneered, almost in disbelief. Getting kicked out of the car wasn't enough of a hint for the young man. "Tony Ricker," Elliot said skeptically. "Yeah, that's me," Tony said. Putting his hand over the receiver, Elliot told Danny, "This Ricker is another one of my problems. I just hope what I'm about to do works." 2 seconds later, the ghost of Elliot disappeared into the phone receiver. "Wow," Danny said enthusiastically. "That's some trick." Danny held the receiver to his ear. He could hear Tony Ricker's favorite music blasting away. He put an eye to the receiver. "What are you doing?" Diane asked. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you," Danny said, "but you have to leave this phone off the hook for Dad." "What's that supposed to mean? Just trust me." "Leave it off the hook," Danny replied. "When Dad shows up, he'll explain it to you." "Where is he?" "I'm not totally positive, but I think he's at Tony Ricker's house." "Oh no!" Diane groaned. At the same time, Tony Ricker also groaned. A hand, followed by an arm, had sprung from the telephone mouthpiece and grabbed him by the neck. Tony struggled to shake loose. The upper body of the man holding his neck also popped out of the mouthpiece. "If you ever call, talk to, wave at, or even think about Diane Hopper again, I will personally tear off your head and attach your neck to a sewer pipe. Is that plain enough English?" "Yes," Tony gasped, trying to get some air. Elliot relaxed his grip slightly. "Are you the devil?" Tony seriously asked. Elliot shook his head. "I'm worse," he answered, releasing Tony at the same time. "I'm from Pacific Bell." A terrified Tony watched Elliot disappear into the mouthpiece and heard his voice command, "Now count to 500 and destroy this phone." "Yes," Tony screamed into the receiver and immediately started counting. Chapter 20. Elliot's enthusiastic description of his encounter with Tony Ricker horrified Diane. "How could you do something like that?" she asked. "Diane, that guy's all bad news. The room is a mess and the posters on the wall are disgusting. Believe me, I'm helping you." "That's not the kind of help I need, in case you haven't noticed. I've been going through some heavy changes lately. My friends at school are doing all kinds of things, but I'm not doing anything except sticking around this place and raising 2 kids. The kind of help I need is a good talk with Mom. She would understand. But she's not here anymore, and neither are you. I guess I understand how you feel. You don't have to be so cranky about it. After all, I'm the one who just died. I'm the one with no life," Diane said, shrugging off his response. "I'm your driver now. I'm their mother. I can't go on like this, and I'm not kidding." Elliot watched Diane's angry departure. He felt terrible. Some of his proverbial chickens were coming home to roost, and he found himself wishing they had shown up while he was alive. Hey, what was it you wanted me for? He called to Danny, who was going upstairs to his room. Get it, Dad, Danny replied. I don't think you're very good at helping anyone these days. Saddened by another rejection, Elliot slowly walked into the living room and sat down on the couch. He needed to think. His family seemed to be coming apart. Or had it been coming apart for some time? Had he been too busy to notice? Upstairs, Amanda clicked on the cassette player, and Elliot's voice soon broke the quiet in the house. His taped version of the Canterville Ghost had the attention of everybody, including Elliot. Amanda enjoyed the tape. Elliot sadly wished he had been around for live performances of Oscar Wilde's Ghost Tale. Danny gloomily decided to go by in school by himself, and Diane nostalgically leafed through the family photo album and brushed aside her tears each time she came to a picture of her mom. As the night went on, Elliot flickered a few times, tried to tell himself to relax and forget about the flickering, but it worried him. He had a lot to do, and this time was running out. Sorry to be waking you so early, he told Diane the next morning, but I have to be at work before everybody else. Why don't you fly down there? Diane said grumpily. Need to save the energy I have left, Elliot said. I really must. Okay, Diane said. I'll drive you and come back here to make sure Danny and Amanda get off all right. A little later during the ride to the office, Elliot said, I'm sorry things are the way they are. If I were living, I would do things differently. I know you would, Diane said sympathetically, but she truly wasn't convinced. The early morning traffic was worse than Diane had imagined it would be. After dropping off Elliot, she raced home. It was getting late, and she convinced Danny and Amanda were still fast asleep. She was wrong, but she just managed to get home in time. As she walked into the kitchen, she heard the school bus honking. That's for you, she told Danny. No fooling, Danny said sarcastically as he shakily stood up a large trunk and headed for the bus stop. Surprised by the trunk and the words, "The Trunk of Doom," crudely lettered on the side, Diane followed him outside and said, I thought you couldn't do your tricks without the kit Dad forgot to get for you. I'll do it without his help, Danny said solemnly. Danny, is that safe? Danny crossed the street and got on the bus, leaving Diane's questions unanswered. Oh, Danny, Diane whispered as the bus pulled away. Please be careful. The image of Danny getting on the school bus with a trunk of doom stuck with Diane. Later, while she was walking to class with Janelle, she decided Danny might need help even if he didn't want it. Janelle, she said, pausing by a payphone. I have to call my dad. Go on, Janelle said, smiling at the boys passing and greeting her. We have time. Just as Diane spotted Tony Ricker coming towards him. Hi, Tony, she called. At first, Tony squinted to see who was calling him. Then he got a clear picture of Diane, and his eyes almost popped out of his head. A second later, he was running in the other direction, knocking students out of his way. What stung his butt? Janelle asked. Diane shrugged, but she knew better. Hi, Carol, she said into the phone. May I speak with my dad? It's very important. Carol was in Elliot's office, but she wasn't alone with him. He was making a slide presentation to Mr. Collins with a large assemblage of company executives. Are you sure it can't wait? Carol asked. I'm positive. All right. Diane, I'll tell him. Well, Elliot told the group, this brings me to capital gains. Excuse me, Elliot, Carol interrupted, but your daughter is on the phone and she says it's very important. Elliot's immediate reaction was to take the call and find out what was wrong. The enraged expression on Mr. Collins' face scared him. I can't talk to her now, he whispered, but try to find out what's the matter. Although she was irritated at not being able to get through to Elliot, Diane held her anger in check long enough to provide an abbreviated message about Danny, and then she slammed down the receiver. What's bothering you? Janelle asked. Oh, Diane said. I just wish Elliot had some time to talk to me. He's always busy. Hey, that's nothing to complain about. My dad seems to be around all the time. Sometimes I think he isn't around, and he just pops up like a ghost. Diane laughed. It doesn't work that way. What are you talking about? Just talking garbage, Diane replied. But we better get to class, or we'll be popping up in the office begging for an admit slip. Chapter 21. Danny knew his older sister was worried about him. He was worried too. He had good presentation planned for career day, and he had been confident that Mr. Turner, the teacher, and his classmates would be thrilled by the Trunk of Doom kit. Now he had no confidence. He guessed he could do the trick he had thrown together as a replacement, but he didn't think it would be a big hit. Glancing around the classroom, Danny realized the other kids were totally bored with Stuart's presentation. I should do better than this, he thought, turning back towards Stuart, who was at the front of the room. Some truly wonderful people have helped make high finance and leverage bias an exciting field, Stuart said in closing, and because most of them are now in jail, someone needs to fill the vacuum that exists. Why not me? Thank you. Danny and two other kids applauded. "Thank you, Stuart," Mr. Turner said, tossing a dirty look at one kid who had booed. "In the future, when any of us hear the vacuums, we'll think of you. Maybe we should call him Hoover," one kid called out, and several others laughed. "Not funny," Mr. Turner remarked. Let's get to our next presentation. Daniel Hopper. Danny pulled out a trunk to a spot in front of Mr. Turner's desk. "This is going to be a drag," a kid from third row called out. "Still not funny," Mr. Turner remarked. The two girls giggled with their approval. Danny faced the class, looking very serious about what he had to say. "As many of you know," he began, "I've long dreamed of a career as a professional magician." Not a musician, very different. Someone in the back replied with a loud snoring noise, and a ripple of giggles followed it. Danny's determination matched his seriousness. Shrugging off in the ridicule, he motioned to the classmates he had asked to assist him, and they hurried to the front of the room. "In a moment," Danny said, "my assistants are going to blindfold me, wrap chains around me, and lock them in place. While they're working, I'll tell you a little more about the career." Danny's assistants liked their assignments and immediately set to work on him. "The mean annual income for magicians is under $10,000, Danny reported. "You can make more at Burger King," someone called out. A few students laughed, and Danny continued, "Most magicians are forced to work at conventions and children's parties. Maybe you can do my little sister's birthday," a boy in the front row called, "and make her disappear." "Not funny," Mr. Turner said, and the laughter immediately died down. "Chains are in place and locked," one assistant told Danny, who was already blindfolded. "Now help me in the trunk," Danny said. A hush came over the class as Danny was assisted into the trunk. Standing, he didn't appear small enough to fit inside the trunk when it was closed, and the students wondered if that was what Danny intended. "I'm going to be doing the Trunk of Doom trick," Danny explained. "Today, because of commercially sold trunks, any moron can perform this trick." "We can see that," someone called. "I'm not any moron," Danny shot back. "Anyway, I don't have any commercially sold props. For reasons there are too many personal and painful fucking shit. God damn it. Fired for this. I'll never work in this town again. I've slipped up. My emotions are just overreacting, just boiling, flowing out of the pores of my face like some sort of witch's brew. Anyways, I don't have any commercially sold props for reasons that are too personal and painful to divulge. Therefore, I will have to escape from this trunk only with my magician's skills. No trick props, no easy out." Danny began to lower his chained body into place. Looking seriously, Mr. Turner said, "Daniel, are you sure this is safe?" "To be honest, I'm not sure it is, but there comes a time when a young man must move into action. Every young man has a time when he can't rely on Dad anymore, and he has to prove himself that he's a man on his own." Thinking Danny's speech was part of his routine, a few students applauded. "Well, okay," Mr. Turner said. "Go on and do your stuff." After getting as low as he could, Danny braced himself for the pushing and shoving of his assistants. It was a tight squeeze, but Danny fit, and the trunk lid was quickly lowered on him and shut tight. Danny wasted no time. In the first move, he attached the blindfold to a tiny hook inside the trunk, and he jerked his head, and the blindfold came free. Next, Danny opened his mouth and stretched his hand to grab the small key out of his tongue. When his hand was inches away from the key, it fell to the floor. Danny twisted quickly and tried to reach the key. There was no room to maneuver. He couldn't get to the key. He could feel the sweat running down his forehead. Calm, he told himself, but his next effort was anything but calm. The trunk shook and rattled, and Danny heard some students laughing. He looked through a small pinhole that had been made in the trunk and saw some other students shaking their heads in disgust. $5 said the janitor has to come and get him out of there, one called. The remark got a big laugh, and Danny pulled away from the pinhole, feeling totally humiliated. "Danny," Mr. Turner called, "are you all right?" "Yeah," Danny answered. His lack of confidence was apparent. The boos and groans that followed added to Danny's humiliation, but he refused to give up, trying for the key with his mouth. When he failed again, his frustration became too much for him to take. He banged his head against the walls of the trunk. Seeing Danny's frustration and concern for his well-being, Mr. Turner leaned close to the trunk and said, "Danny, what's going on in there?" The clamor in the classroom immediately died down as each student strained to hear Danny's response. "Mr. Turner," Danny said. "Yes, Danny? Could you please call the janitor to help me?" To Danny, the roar of student laughter was almost unbearable. He couldn't remember a time when he had felt so ashamed. "Stuart," Mr. Turner called over the noise, "run downstairs and get the janitor." Danny hoped Stuart went fast. He wanted out of the trunk, and out of school for that matter. As soon as the janitor freed him, he was leaving. A new career he wanted to try, being a runaway. Chapter 22. Moments later, Danny felt as if the trunk were moving. Looking through the people, he saw some classmates gasping in amazement at the trunk, which seemed to be rising from the floor. Danny's eyes brightened as a wonderful idea passed through his mind. "Hiya, Danny boy," Elliot said, pushing his head through the floor of the trunk. "Dad," Danny said excitedly, "I just knew it was you." "Yeah," Elliot said, struggling to lift the trunk higher, "but you've gained weight." "Janitor was busy," Stuart called out. Then he immediately looked through the people and spotted Stuart by the classroom door. His eyes opened wide at the sight of the rising trunk, and they rolled back and he slumped to the floor. He fainted again. "Hey," Denny said, "I thought you had a big meeting today." "I did, but your sister left a message telling me she was worried about you and this trick. I got worried too and decided you were a lot more important than the boring meeting. So here I am." Danny beamed with pride as Elliot used his teeth to loosen some of his bindings. Once they were loose enough, Danny got the key and unlocked the chains. "Thanks, Dad," Danny said. "You don't know how much this means to me." "You're welcome, son. Now let's give him a classy finish, one they'll never forget." Danny moved into position while Elliot lowered the trunk onto Mr. Turner's desk. Once it was in place, Danny opened the lid. Then, with Elliot doing the lifting, Danny floated straight up over the trunk. Several girls screamed and several boys scrambled for cover behind some other girls. Looking at Mr. Turner, Danny said, "How am I doing?" "You just pulled out an A out of my hat," Mr. Turner remarked. "Corny," Elliot whispered to Danny as he closed the trunk and lowered his son into a sitting position on it. Danny smiled and his classmates greeted him with a standing ovation. "Dad," Danny said, his whisper almost drowned out by the applause. "You're the greatest." "Thanks, Danny. I'll see you later." Elliot literally flew back to his office. The second time that line has been nice. Pull back. Definitely not laziness. But as he suspected, it was no longer filled with company executives. They'd been dismissed, but Mr. Collins was waiting along with Mr. Seymour and Mr. Nero. "Terribly sorry I had to leave," Elliot began, trying hard to think of a lie Mr. Collins could live with. "You're terribly sorry," Mr. Collins said mockingly. "You are definitely a worthless piece of slime." "I wouldn't go that far," Elliot mumbled. "He's a little upset," Mr. Seymour explained. "Really?" Elliot replied. "I can't believe you would walk away," Mr. Collins said, "just at the very time we were closing negotiations." "I didn't walk," Elliot half whispered. "I'm sure Hopper had an excellent reason for walking off," Mr. Seymour said, looking for Elliot to pick up on his comment. "If I hadn't stepped in," Collins went on, "the deal would have fallen through and I'd have had to kill you." "Too late," Elliot mumbled, and bit his lip to keep from smiling. "Well," Seymour said, turning his attention to Elliot, "we closed the deal, so he doesn't have to kill you now." "That's absolutely right," Collins added. "All I have to do now is ruin you." "This is the part where Mr. Collins and I are in total agreement," Seymour said cheerfully. "You're fired, Hopper," Collins screamed. That wasn't true. I sincerely apologize. My throat has gotten quite tired over the past 2.5 hours of reading. And I'm sure your brains have gotten quite tired over the past 2.5 hours of listening. Not that anybody would fucking waste their time listening to this. No one's listening to this. I could say whatever I want. I could say that I like to shit on elephant tits, and no one would care, because you couldn't hear me. Not going to come back to bite me in the ass at all, no sir. "You're fired, Hopper," Collins screamed. Though Elliot halfway expected he was going to be fired, the actual words upset him. "Mr. Collins," he pleaded, "please give me a chance to—" "I said you're fired. That's it, you're fired." "You're walked out on the meeting," Seymour added. I've got a ready excellent explanation about that," Elliot answered. "Fired," Collins roared. "Fired! Fired!" "Not for me," Elliot said quickly. "It's for my kids. The whole future depends on this. I just can't possibly lose my job right now. I've given everything I have to this company for the past 14 years. I've served you well and loyally, and I think that has to count for something. It should mean something to you." Collins stopped and signaled Seymour to be quiet. Elliot's words had touched the man. He considered them carefully, giving Elliot the benefit of his 14 years, and said, "Hopper, you're fired!" Feeling lost and flickering on top of that, Elliot staggered out of the office and went to Carol's well-lit area. "Don't bother calling Diane for me," he said sadly. "I'm going to walk home." "Walk home?" Carol said, looking up. "You can't walk that far." "Too bad," Elliot said. "I already started." Carol started to voice her disagreement, but she couldn't see Elliot. He certainly had already started. "Take your time," she said, wondering who she was talking to. The way Elliot considered everything that had happened since his death, he had served to remind him how little attention he had been giving to his kids. He recalled the look on Danny's face when he pushed his head through the bottom of the trunk. Sure, he'd been happy, but he'd also looked as if he couldn't believe his father would show up for an important moment. Elliot felt bad about that. In fact, he felt bad about everything. When Elliot flickered again, he realized he was burning up a lot of his remaining energy with self-pity, so he walked on, trying to think of a way to keep his family together without him. Passing his bank and seeing a few people lined up outside the automatic teller window, Elliot realized he could do a lot more magic than the trick he'd done with Danny. He could pass through the bank's locked doors and walk right into its safe. He could get all the money his family would ever need to stay together, but he couldn't tell his kids where he'd gotten it because he couldn't take it. Even worse than that, he realized he couldn't take the money. He didn't even like the things that he had done to pass his physical, but now it appeared that didn't make any difference. Dark by the time Elliot reached his front door. He paused there, wondering how Diane and the others would take the news. "Elliot," Joan called. "You're not even dressed yet." Seeing Joan standing in her door with a formal gown, Elliot remembered the banquet they was scheduled to attend. She looked beautiful. "I'm sorry, Joan," he said sadly, "but I just can't talk to you about anything right now." Elliot's response seemed outrageous to Joan. To control her anger, she closed her eyes and counted to 10. When she opened them, Elliot was gone. Chapter 23. As soon as Elliot stepped through the front door, he felt himself flicker. The time sensation was far more severe than any of the previous ones, and it frightened him. "Not yet," he said, but he doubted anyone was listening. The house was quiet, and Elliot stepped into the living room and found the kids sitting there, almost in the dark. "Hi, Dad," Amanda said immediately. "Hi," Elliot said. "Were you all waiting for me?" "Not really," Diane answered. "We were listening to Danny's story about how our ghost dad saved the day for him. Now the kids at school think of Danny as Houdini rather than the weirdo who locked himself in a trunk." "That's right, but I'm afraid I have some bad news for you all." "Let me guess," Diane said sarcastically. "Fired." "Yeah, you got it. I guess you could say I blew it, gang. I'm sorry. Truly sorry." "Wonderful news," Diane said. "All week long we've had to hear your story about waiting till Thursday and everything will be super. Let me add to the bad news. Thursday is just about here." "I said I'm sorry." "Your going away present is to tell us you're sorry," Diane said angrily. "I'm not sorry," Danny said, interrupting. "I don't care about your job, Dad. When you were alive, you would have never left any meeting to come help me." Elliot appreciated Danny's warm smile. "Thanks," he said. Then he was about to add a few more enthusiastic words when the front door flew open. All eyes focused on Joan, who walked right into the house and said, "Elliot, I don't know what's going on with you, but we've got to have this out right now." In response, Elliot flickered. "Go ahead, you've always had time for her," Diane whispered, and then abruptly set out to her room. By then, Joan was moving towards Elliot, and Elliot was retreating to a darker part of the room. "Why is it always so dark around here lately?" she asked. "We have something to hide?" Joan's final question sent a chill up Elliot's spine. He was tired of the entire charade. It had gotten to him nowhere. "Joan," he said, looking in her eyes, "I'm dead." "Hey, I'm tired too," she answered. "I work hard all day, but that doesn't give me the right to break dates." "No, you don't get it. I'm really dead. I'm a ghost." "That's perfectly normal," Amanda chimed in. "Watch this," Elliot said just before turning on a nearby light. Joan screamed so soon after Elliot disappeared that the entire thing seemed like a simultaneous event. A second later, he flipped the light off and immediately reappeared. In response to Joan's seemingly uncomprehending stare, Elliot shrugged and said, "Dead as a doornail." "You're going to have to explain all of this for me," Joan said, fighting off natural inclination to run out of the house. After warning that his story would be hard to believe, Elliot launched into it. When he reached the part about coming out of the river and not being seen by the policeman, he said, "About then I was beginning to think I was dead." "Actually," a voice said from the doorway, "I'm afraid you're not dead." Elliot thought he recognized the voice, and the body standing in the doorway matched. It was Sir Edith. "What are you doing here?" Elliot blurted. "We'll get to that in good time. Is the kitchen this way? I'm famished." Moving quickly, Elliot blocked Sir Edith's paths. "Your trip to the kitchen can wait," he said. "For now, you need to tell me what you mean about my not being dead." Joan glanced at Danny and Amanda. Like her, they obviously had no idea who the strange man was or how he had happened to appear there. "Well, you're not being very hospitable," Sir Edith remarked. "But I'll tell you, I did some calculations on your measurements. You do recall me taking your measurements, don't you?" Yes, Elliot said impatiently. "Well," Sir Edith went on, "you're not a ghost. You're a spirit, all right, but you're definitely not a ghost. Not yet, at least." Joan didn't know what was going on, but she couldn't just stand by any longer. "Who is this guy?" she blurted out. "Oh, I'm terribly sorry for being so rude," Sir Edith said, handing her one of his cards. "Is that your name?" Joan asked. "Excuse me," Elliot interrupted, "but can we get back to the matter of me? I'm beginning to lose my spirit." "Corny," Danny groaned. "No one asked you," Elliot replied. "Well, to put it bluntly," Sir Edith announced, "if you didn't die, you just took the occasion to jump out of your body." "Why would I do something like that? I would say something scared you. Something quite dangerous happened and it scared you. Yeah, Elliot said, thinking about the event that he had been describing to Joan. The taxi went off the bridge into the river. As a result, I drowned. That's pretty scary. Oh, there's where you're wrong. You didn't drown. Merely jumped out of your body. Merely, Elliot repeated. How often does this happen? Excuse my unfortunate use of merely. It doesn't fit your situation. Actually, it's been rumored there was only one case like yours in America. It was years ago, before the poor chap was able to find his body, he had to wear a bunny costume. Poor fella wore it for a week. A bunny costume, Elliot said, clearly interested in the details of Sir Edith's story. Did his name happen to be Arthur Hopper? Elliot's question intrigued Sir Edith. I really don't know, he replied. That was my father, Elliot proudly announced. I know all about him wearing the bunny suit, but he told us the zipper got stuck. Oh, just as I suspected after the measurements. Your ability to jump out of your body is hereditary. Wow, Denny said cheerfully. This is far out. How long will it be before I'm able to do it? Just wait your turn. Just wait your turn, young man, Sir Edith admonished. Right now, your father has a body out of the world somewhere, and we really need to try to find it before he checks out for good. How? Joan asked. Call in the body snatchers, Elliot joked, and grill them until one of them talks. Denny laughed, but Sir Edith said, This is not a laughing matter. Elliot could be gone before he utters another one of his attempts at humour, and if he goes, it is not coming back. Chapter 24. Final stretch. 27 chapters total. The last, 15 or so pages. Exciting. The emotional climax of this book is really difficult to express in words. Feelings it makes me feel. Chapter 24. Okay, Elliot said, winking at Danny. No more joking. A body like mine deserves to be found. I'll call the police stations. I'm going to go over to my house and call all the cab companies, Joan announced. Someone may know something. On his first call, Elliot reached Sergeant Edith Berger. Let me talk to him, Sir Edith immediately requested. It's a she, Elliot said, holding his hand over the receiver while Danny giggled loudly. This is not the time for laughing, Sir Edith told Danny. Sergeant, Elliot went on, did you hear about the accident on the bridge on Monday? Tell me a little more about it, please. Cab went over the river. Oh, really? Was anyone killed? That's what I want to know. Can you help me? I'm afraid not. This is the first I've heard of the accident. You're going to have to call another precinct. Any suggestions? Yes, you're going to have to call another precinct. Elliot slammed down the phone, trying to recall if he'd been given the woman his name. She sounded as if she might have been related to you, told Sir Edith. Really? Really? No, Elliot replied, but I can tell this isn't going to be easy. I hope Joan gets lucky. At that moment, Joan thought she was lucky. The all-over alert cab company had just answered its phone after 37 rings. Yeah, a gruff male voice said. I'm calling about a cab that fell in the river on Monday. Wouldn't you rather ride in a dry cab? The gruff voice asked. No, I don't want that cab. I want to find out about the driver and his passenger. Lady, it wasn't our cab, but if it was our cab, I wouldn't tell you a thing about it. Do you realize you're using up time on a very busy phone? No, but I do realize I'm talking to a moron. Joan slammed the phone down. She wanted Elliot to live. She glanced through her window through the Hopper house. She imagined Elliot was hard at work and decided she was going to let one bad call slow her down. Elliot deserved a substantial effort. This is a substantial effort, Sir Edith said, unknowingly taking the words out of Joan's head. How can you eat so much at a time like this? Elliot asked. I told you I was famished. Say, I'm not kidding about this meatloaf. Your daughter's quite a cook. These things must be pieces of olive she's cooked into the loaf. They're boogers, Danny joked. Yeah, Amanda added. Diane always puts them in for company to enjoy. Sir Edith almost gagged. Lovely children you have, he remarked. I don't have time for joking, Elliot replied, winking once more at Danny. You certainly don't, Sir Edith agreed, just as Elliot flickered again. With deadly seriousness, Elliot began working his way through the telephone book listing for police stations. After a few more unproductive calls, he switched his approach. Instead of asking about the accident, he asked if there was any information about Elliot Hopper. Pretending to be a friend, he reported that Hopper had been missing since Monday morning and had last been seen in a cab. As Elliot failed to learn a thing, call after call, a feeling of gloom fell over the group assembly in the living room. Sir Edith stopped eating, and Danny and Amanda sat there with impassive expressions, masking their worst fears. Finally, he made his last call and recited his story about Elliot Hopper. Okay, Elliot said a few seconds later. Thanks for checking. Nothing? Nothing? Sir Edith said as Elliot pulled down the receiver. It seems as Elliot Hopper has disappeared off the face of the earth. Catching Elliot's remarks as she entered the house, Jones said, It certainly does. The cab companies were no help at all. You're not at Central Hospital either. They do have a cab driver there, and he was brought in on Monday. What's his name? Elliot asked. They wouldn't release his information, Joan explained, and they wouldn't say where he had the accident, but they did say it was an accident victim. You must talk to him, Sir Edith told Elliot. That's out of the question, Joan said. They're not even letting close relatives see the man. He's been in a coma since they brought him in, but he's alive, so I guess you could say that somebody up there likes him. If you're talking about heaven, Elliot quipped, somebody up there obviously doesn't know him. I seem to have slipped out of my accent for a minute. That's very strange. This is absolutely my natural voice. I had no idea why I would change out of it. That's bizarre. Unprecedented. Dad, Danny said, revealing his fear, you have to concentrate on finding your body. Along with the others, Elliot silently considered the situation, trying to see the cab driver didn't strike him as particularly useful. The man was in a coma, but even if he was awake and alert, he probably wouldn't make a lot of sense. He hadn't when Elliot was in the cab. He was the reason Elliot had drowned. Suddenly, it hit Elliot. I didn't drown, he called. Look, I'm still here. Is your mind going? Is your mind going? Sir Edith asked. No, I just mean I'm not underwater. If the cab driver survived and nobody found me, that means I'm somewhere else. I must have washed ashore somewhere. You must have washed ashore somewhere near the shore near the accident, Jones said excitedly. We can search the riverbank. Let's get moving, Elliot said. Danny and Amanda, call your sister. Danny and Amanda raced to the bottom of the stairs. Diane, Amanda called. Daddy wants you. Hurry up, Danny added. We have to go to the river and look for Dad's body. I'll be right there, Diane called and jumped off of bed. She had been right in her room for a few hours, missed the arrival of Sir Edith. Danny had run up earlier and told her about the Englishman and the good news he'd brought about Elliot not being dead. Unfortunately, Danny had added all the stuff about the missing body and Elliot not going for good if it couldn't be found. The entire matter depressed Diane. Instead of wanting to listen to every phone call Elliot made, she had opted to stay in the room and hope for the best. Now it sounded as if the best had been accomplished. After checking herself out in the mirror, Diane raced down the hall. She heard voices downstairs, then she heard the sound of the front door opening. Picked up her pace and headed down the stairs. On the second step, her foot slapped down on a roller skate. She hadn't noticed the skate, and it had sent her sailing right through the banister. The crashing noise caught the attention of Elliot and the others. They turned quickly and rushed back to the house. On the landing below the stairs, they saw Diane's lifeless body. Oh no! Elliot screamed. Chapter 25. Using some first aid techniques, Joan worked vigorously to revive Diane. After several minutes, she said dejectedly, It's no use! The paramedics may be able to help her, but my guess is she's going to the hospital. I'll call 911 right away, Elliot said. Say, Sir Edith said, why don't you allow me to call? You should be on your way to the riverbed. You need to find your boy. Forget it, Elliot said stubbornly. Until I know that Diane is all right, I'm not going anywhere. I can take care, Joan started to say. I'm sure you can, Joan, but I'm still not going. The riverbed can wait, and so can everyone else. Is Diane going to be fine? Amanda asked, tears forming in the corners of her eyes. Yes, she is, honey, Sir Edith assured. Danny wrapped his arm around his younger sister and gently led her towards the living room, where Elliot phoned for emergency assistance. In a few minutes, the fire engine and ambulance arrived at the house. 2 firemen entered first, followed by 2 paramedics. As soon as Elliot ascertained that they could see him, he briefed them on Diane's fall. After checking Diane's pulse, one fireman said, I'm going to give her a shot of oxygen. Maybe it'll bring her around. Elliot and the others watched and prayed while the firemen worked over Diane. They obviously knew what they were doing, but Diane didn't respond to any of their efforts. Finally, one fireman told the paramedics, Get your gurney in here. The girl's going to the hospital. That's all right with you, isn't it, sir? The other fireman asked Elliot. Flickering slightly, Elliot noticed a look of surprise on the fireman's face. It's fine with me, Elliot said. I'm just a little nervous. I can see that, but don't worry, sir. There are outstanding people working emergency down at Central. Just be calm. Thanks, Elliot said, catching Sir Edith's signal that they needed to talk. When the paramedics returned with the gurney, Elliot slipped off to the side. You should be looking for your boy, Sir Edith said. Sir Edith warned. These people will take good care of your daughter. I'm going with Diane. What can you do for her? Without responding, Elliot went to the side of the gurney and watched as the paramedics strapped Diane into it. He realized he had no logical answer to Sir Edith's question, but he truly didn't think that he needed one. Diane needed somebody by her side, someone who loved her, and wanted only the best from her. Elliot figured that was what he could do for her, even if she was only a spirit. Her ghost dad was sticking around. You take the kids and Sir Edith in my car, Elliot told Joan. I'm going to the ambulance. I'll be right behind you, Joan said, taking the car keys from him. While it didn't seem as Diane should be in serious condition because of her fall, her failure to regain consciousness concerned the paramedics, and they worked rapidly to get her onto the road to the hospital. Elliot followed them out of the house, and Joan led the kids into Sir Edith into the car. A small crowd had gathered outside, and one person in it was Stuart. He grabbed for Danny's arm and said, What's happening? Diane fell, Danny said. They're taking her to the hospital. Is she going to be all right? I don't know, Danny said, hurrying to join the others. As Danny rushed off, Stuart turned and spotted Elliot Hopper in the back of the ambulance. A shiver ran up his spine. He wondered how the paramedics would feel if one of their riders was a ghost. You don't scare me, Mr. Hopper, he said under his breath, and looked around to see if he had been heard. A minute later, the ambulance pulled away and the crowd of onlookers dispersed, leaving Stuart alone under the streetlight. Okay, Mr. Ghost, he said fearlessly. You get your ride to the hospital and see who's there to greet you. Stuart raced off to his house and glanced over his shoulder at the Hopper house as he ran. A big mouth had gotten him in trouble last time, he decided. This time he was going to act anonymously. He had learned what he needed to learn about dealing with ghosts. By the time Stuart reached his room, his newfound courage was fading. Sure, he had seen Mr. Hopper ride off in the ambulance, but there was no telling when he would pop up. Deciding to proceed with caution, Stuart dimmed the lights in his room, then he sat down by the phone and tried to think of the name of the organization he'd heard about. They would take care of Mr. Hopper. Finally, he picked up the receiver and tapped out the number and information. I'd like the number of Ghost Dusters, Stuart said. I don't know the address. One moment, please, the operator said. Stuart got ready to write down the recorded number as he expected to hear it next. Instead, he heard a tapping on his window. Oh no, he said, as his body started to shake. The information you have requested is not available, the recorded voice of the operator announced as the tapping on the windows repeated. Stuart needed 2 hands to put down the receiver, and then he stepped over to the window. If it was who he thought it was, there was no sense in running. A familiar face smiled through the window at Stuart. It was Diane, and seemed to be hanging on the window ledge. He quickly opened the window and said, How did you get up here? I thought you were in the ambulance. Jumped out of the ambulance, Diane lied as she threw her legs over the windowsill and stepped into Stuart's room. Then I climbed on the vines to your room. I need your help. You find out that your old man is a ghost? Stuart asked. Yeah, Diane said, and I found out something else too. I'm glad you decided to tell me, Stuart said, looking slightly puzzled, but are you sure you climbed vines to get into my window? I don't remember seeing any vines out there. They may have just sprung up, Diane said. Turn a light on and I'll show you the other thing I found. Oh, sure, Stuart said, reaching for the light switch. As soon as the lights came on, Diane disappeared. Stuart blinked several times, not wanting to believe what had happened. My father and I don't like rats, Diane said, just before Stuart fainted. Diane smiled. She was glad she had heard Stuart shooting off his mouth as the ambulance pulled away. She didn't imagine he would be making any more phone calls when he was awakened. She still had a lot to do before checking in at the hospital. She had been able to fly, being able to fly cut down on time being used. She concentrated, and within a matter of seconds, she was on her way to Jonelle's house. Almost done. This is the second to last chapter. Chapter 26. Jonelle was parking her car when Diane caught up with her. She opened the car door and sat down alongside her friend. Hi, Jonelle said, looking surprised. Where did you come from? The sky? Something like that, Diane said. Don't jump out of the car. I have a long story to tell you. Not much time to tell it in. I don't jump, Jonelle said firmly. When Diane had finished her story and reinforced parts of it with the flashlight from Jonelle's glove compartment, she was delighted by Jonelle's wicked smile. What are you thinking? She asked. I was thinking of what I would do if I was a ghost, Jonelle remarked. We can have a lot of fun. I can't believe it, Diane said, feigning disgust. You're supposed to be my best friend, and I tell you I might be dead. You don't even act upset. Well, Jonelle said, shrugging, I probably would be more upset one of these days, but you seem to be in a good mood. I didn't want to be unhappy. What are you going to do now? Break the news to Elliot, Diane said. I don't even know why he had to go to the hospital. I don't think you or the firemen or the paramedics would have known I was dead. Maybe you get to be a ghost for a little while before you die. Journelle surmised. Like in the movies, it's a preview of coming attractions. Diane laughed. I'm going, she said. Drop around any time, Journelle said, looking somewhat emotionally distraught. Take care of yourself. Concentrating again, Diane reached the hospital in a matter of seconds. There she saw a medical team working feverishly on her lifeless body. She also spotted Joan, Danny, Amanda, and the Englishman who brought Elliot the good news, bad news message. They were outside the emergency room, looking tired and sad. Back inside the well-lit emergency room, Diane observed another invisible form wearing a grim expression. It was Elliot, floating over to his side. Diane said, Hey, dude, cheer up. Elliot appeared puzzled and weak. Diane, he said, what are you doing? Looking after my old man, I guess. For a supporting gesture, Diane poked her head through the wall. Stop fooling around and get back to your body, her father said. Not now, Diane said, disappearing through the wall. Elliot followed and chased her down the hall. When he got close, he called, Diane, please talk to me. Okay, Diane said, moving close to him. How did you get out of your body? I don't know. I remember falling, and then I was in the closet. When I came out, you were leaning over my body, so I went back into the closet and came out again, and I was being taken to the ambulance. You must have been frightened and jumped out of your body, Elliot said. I gather it's all hereditary. Anyway, you have to get back into your body before something serious happens. You mean something really serious, Diane said, suddenly recalling some of her frustrations. Like having your dad away all the time and then your mama dies? Serious like being a teenager and not being able to have any fun because you've got to raise your kids because your father is too busy? Serious like not getting any dates with other girls my age? Or serious like having my father die without leaving us any way to take care of ourselves? Diane, Elliot pleaded, this isn't the time to do this to me. It's always about you, isn't it? How this affects you. Unfortunately, I'm thinking about me right now, and being a ghost feels a lot better than the crummy life I've been living. I'm definitely not going back to that. Diane, life is all there is, believe me. The cynical grin on Diane's face changed. As soon as Elliot flickered. What was that? She asked. Don't throw your life away, Elliot said, disregarding her question. I'm begging you. Your life is everything. So many emotions. So many emotions. Elliot immediately flickered again, but for a longer time. Frightened by what seems to be happening, Diane said, Elliot, are you all right? When you're young, you think nothing can happen to you, Elliot said, clearly losing his image and voice as his spirit body continued to flicker. I never had a care. I put everything off. I kept delaying my happiness, the happiness of our family. Elliot! Diane screamed as he flickered violently and dropped to the floor. What's happening? Listen to me, Diane. There is no Thursday. The whole thing is about what's here and now. About today and tomorrow. Don't do what I did. Don't throw it away. Diane fought off the tears. Shouldn't we try to find your body? She asked. That's not important. It's you. Diane reached down and tried to help him up. Come on, she said. I'll help you look. No, I'm not doing a thing until you get back in your body. Feeling just on edge, Diane said, why don't you let me help you? Because I want you to live, Elliot said, struggling with the words as his condition worsened. I'm your father, and I want you to know what your mother knew. I want you to know what it's like to fall in love. I want you to know what it's like to hold a child in your arms like your mama held you when you were born, because you love me, Diane said knowingly, and the tears ran from her eyes. Elliot tried to speak, but he had lost most of his remaining energy. Finally, he smiled and nodded weakly. For Diane, the fun of playing ghost was all over. Elliot was slipping away right before her eyes, and there didn't seem to be a thing she could do about it. Someone help me, she called in frustration. Please help me. Diane immediately realized no one could hear her plea for help. She hadn't been concentrating. Looking around, she noticed they were in the corridor next to the hospital's intensive care unit. Without a moment's hesitation, Diane rushed into the darkened room. The beds in the room seemed to be filled, and all the patients seemed almost lifeless. As Diane's eyes jumped from one bed to another, she noticed that each of the patients was hooked to a monitor that kept track of their heartbeat and other vital signs. Suddenly, her eyes locked on one bandaged patient. She moved closer to him. Oh my God, she gasped, steadying herself to keep her from falling on the patient. I can't believe it! Chapter 7, the final chapter. Almost done. I can just feel your anticipation coming through the internet. The waves of communication. It's so exciting. Diane flew through the wall of the intensive care unit. Come on, Daddy, she said, dragging Elliot through the same wall and into the room. What is it? Elliot asked as Diane pointed him towards a bandaged patient in a nearby bed. It's you, Diane said, releasing Elliot and picking up the patient's chart. But they have you listed as Curtis Birch. Elliot gathered up all his remaining energy and threw hard. The cab driver. he said excitedly. That was his name. I didn't have any ID on me. That crazy Curtis Birch had my wallet. Diane helped Elliot into a position alongside the bed. If you get back in your body, she said, I'll get back in mine. Elliot nodded, and though he felt very weak, he managed to climb onto the bed and swing himself over his lifeless body. A second later, he disappeared into the body, which shuddered slightly before jerking upright. Wow, Elliot said, displaying new strength in his voice. This is really interesting. Hello, Diane. Coming to his side, Diane said, Are you all right? I hurt all over, and I feel as though I weigh 10 tons. You look terrible, Diane said, but her beaming face revealed her happiness. Elliot alternated between winces and grins. I can't believe that something that feels so terrible feels so great, he said. You should try it sometime, like now. Diane wholeheartedly agreed. She gave Elliot a quick kiss and flew out of the room, hoping her body was still in the emergency room. The medical team that had started working on Diane when she arrived at the hospital was still working on her. As she flew into the room, she heard the lead doctor rattle off a series of orders. He sounded anxious, and the beeping sounds coming from the monitor, along with the wavy lines displayed on it, made Diane outright nervous. Hang on, she called. Moving like a track star, Diane hurled herself into the body being examined and sank into it. As soon as her spirit form disappeared, the human leapt upright. The nurses jumped away, looking in total amazement at Diane. Cowabunga, she said. That hurts as much as Elliot said it would, but I'm okay. I really am. Doctors and nurses looked on as Diane struggled to regain her sense of balance. They were almost convinced they were observing a miracle. Awesome, one nurse finally remarked. Yeah, Diane agreed and leapt to the examining table. Hey, thanks everyone, I'm okay. And thanks for your help. Diane walked to the door, and the walk became a sprint as soon as she reached the corridor. Dad, she called after seeing a figure in the hospital gown sprinting towards her from the other end. Diane, the figure replied. They continued towards each other, and once they met, they hugged and whirled each other around joyously. Oh, Daddy, Diane said. I can't tell you how glad I am you're alive. Me too, Elliot said. I mean, their eyes met, and they hugged each other. There was no need for Elliot to explain. They were happy for each other. They loved each other. Let's get the others and go home, Diane suggested. A splendid idea, Elliot agreed. Before they could act on the idea, they saw Joan with Amanda in her arms, Danny and Sir Edith rushing towards them. Are you both for real? Joan said cheerfully. As real as can be, Elliot replied, and from now on, we're staying in these bodies. Right, Diane agreed. Once a ghost is enough. Am I going to jump out of my body someday? Danny said. Young man, Sir Edith said. Your mouth should be washed with soap for even thinking such a thought. How old were you when your sense of humor jumped out of your body? Danny replied. Danny, Elliot said, holding back a smile. Your mind, your mouth. If it weren't for Sir Edith, I might not be here. And if we don't get out of here soon, Joan said, gesturing towards a mob of doctors, nurses, and other hospital personnel gathering in the corridor, we may never get another opportunity. Led by Elliot, Diane and the others moved triumphantly through the corridor and emergency room, still led by Elliot and Diane's miraculous recovery. The doctors and nurses followed them outside. Mr. Hopper, a female voice called. I must speak with you. Elliot shook off his impulse and kept going. It wasn't polite. Yes, he said, turning abruptly. A woman walked up to him and extended her hand. I'm Marcy Nelson, she said, from the hospital's public relations office. I'm here about your amazing recovery with you and your daughter that just took place. It was eyewitnessed by members of our medical staff, and really the recovery should be researched and documented. It's absolutely essential that we talk with you, so we can... Would you please come with... Not now, Elliot interrupted. Sorry, but we'll have to be after. I mean, after we've had a chance to spend some time together. Diane smiled at Joan. How about after the wedding, she said. Wedding! Marcy Nelson said as Elliot and Joan traded romantic glances. Amanda smiled and pointed at her daddy and Joan. When's the wedding? When everything is perfectly normal, Amanda said. I don't think they should be forced to wait that long, Diane joked. Right! Elliot and Joan agreed. Then they marched off to the car, leaving Marcy Nelson totally bewildered. It was late when the car rolled back into the neighborhood. They had a joyous ride. Listening to Elliot and Diane detail some of the things that had happened to them while they were ghosts. Some parts even amused Sir Edith, and was beginning to look as if he was going to be around for a while. Danny was the first to notice the lights in Stuart's room, but as they all looked in his house, the beam coming from his newly placed spotlight above the window was unmistakable. I would imagine that's the best spotlight money can buy, Elliot said. Keep ghosts away, Diane remarked. I'll tell him tomorrow, Danny said. No, after, Amanda chimed in. The wedding, Danny said, smiling. Right! They all answered. And that is the end of Ghost Dad. Thank you for listening with me. If you did, I highly doubt anybody actually bothered listening to all 3 hours. Woolworth McBillions III Esq, and this has been Literary Masterpiece Showcase. Oh god, my voice is fucking killing me. Oh, how did I keep that up for so long? Whoa. Oh shit, it's still recording. Um, eh, eh.